Absurdism. Absurdism is the philosophy born from the collision between humanity's desperate hunger for meaning and a universe that remains cold, silent, and indifferent. It begins with a simple but devastating realization. We ask life for answers, purpose, justice, and clarity, yet the universe offers none. No explanations, no guarantees, no grand design that bends to our need for reassurance. This tension between our longing and the world's refusal is what creates the absurd. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. We build stories, religions, careers, relationships, and identities to convince ourselves that our suffering leads somewhere, that our efforts matter in a cosmic sense. Absurdism tears that comfort away. It forces us to face the possibility that existence has no built-in reason, no ultimate reward waiting at the end, no hidden script guiding our lives. This realization can feel crushing, like standing at the edge of an endless void and realizing nothing will catch you if you fall. Yet absurdism does not ask you to despair or escape. It asks you to stay, to live fully while knowing the game has no final score. Instead of surrendering to nihilism or inventing false meaning to soothe the fear, absurdism challenges you to rebel against the silence itself, to wake up every day fully aware that life is irrational, unfair, and temporary, and still choose to act, to love, to create, and to experience. There is a quiet defiance at the heart of absurdism. It is the courage to keep pushing the stone uphill even when you know it will roll back down. It is laughing in the face of meaninglessness, not because life makes sense, but because you are alive anyway. It is the refusal to let an indifferent universe decide whether your existence is worth living. Determinism. Determinism is the unsettling idea that every thought you have, every choice you make, and every action you take is the inevitable result of events that came before you. Long before you were born, the chain was already in motion. Your genetics, your upbringing, your traumas, your environment, even the chemical reactions firing in your brain, all align in precise ways, silently guiding you toward each moment as if your life were unfolding along a fixed path. At first, determinism feels like a direct attack on freedom. We like to believe we are the authors of our lives, standing at crossroads and freely choosing who we become. Determinism whispers something far more disturbing, that those crossroads may be illusions, and that what feels like choice is simply the final step in a sequence you never controlled. The decision you think you made could not have happened any other way, because every condition leading up to it demanded that exact outcome. This idea forces a painful confrontation with responsibility. If your actions are shaped by forces beyond your control, what does blame mean? What does praise mean? The line between villain and victim begins to blur. Anger, addiction, ambition, kindness, cruelty all start to look like consequences rather than personal failures or triumphs. The world shifts from a moral battlefield into a vast causal machine, endlessly producing outcomes without intention or mercy. Yet determinism does not strip life of intensity. It deepens it. Every moment becomes the visible tip of an invisible history, layers upon layers of causes converging into now. Understanding determinism means realizing that you are not separate from the universe. You are one of its processes. Your thoughts are not outside the system. They are part of the same unfolding logic that moves stars and storms. Whether that realization feels like imprisonment or strange relief depends on how tightly you cling to the idea of control. Free will. Free will is the intoxicating belief that you are the true author of your actions, that when you choose, the choice genuinely belongs to you and could have unfolded differently. It is the feeling of standing in a moment where multiple futures are possible and your decision alone determines which one becomes real. This belief is deeply woven into how we experience life. Regret only hurts because we believe we could have chosen otherwise. Pride only exists because we think our successes are earned. Love feels meaningful because it is given freely, not forced by invisible strings. The power of free will lies not just in choice, but in responsibility. To believe in free will is to accept that you are accountable for who you become. Your habits, your failures, your growth, and your moral character are not merely accidents of circumstance, but reflections of deliberate action. This is both empowering and terrifying. Freedom does not come with instructions, and every decision carries the weight of shaping a future you cannot fully predict. Yet free will is constantly under threat. Biology, psychology, social conditioning, and past experiences all press against it, quietly influencing your desires before you are even aware of them. The unsettling question emerges: if your wants are shaped by forces you did not choose, how free are the choices that follow? Free will lives in this tension, suspended between control and constraint, between agency and influence. Still, the experience of choosing remains undeniable. You feel yourself hesitate, deliberate, resist, and commit. In that moment, freedom feels real, visceral, and immediate. Free will may not be absolute, but it is the space where identity forms. It is the fragile gap where you step forward without certainty, knowing that whatever happens next will carry your name. Moral relativism. Moral relativism is the unsettling idea that right and wrong are not fixed truths written into the fabric of reality, but fluid judgments shaped by culture, history, and perspective. What is considered moral in one society may be condemned in another, and what feels unquestionably right to you may appear deeply wrong to someone raised under different values. This philosophy quietly erodes the comforting belief that morality stands on solid universal ground. At its core, moral relativism forces you to confront how deeply your sense of justice is conditioned. From childhood, you absorb rules, taboos, and ideals long before you question them. These moral frameworks feel natural, even obvious, not because they are objectively true, but because they are familiar. Moral relativism exposes this process, revealing morality as something learned rather than discovered, inherited rather than absolute. This realization can be deeply destabilizing. If morals are relative, then certainty becomes fragile. Condemnation loses its sharp edge. Judgment hesitates. You begin to wonder whether outrage is always righteous or simply reflexive loyalty to your own moral tribe. The line between moral conviction and cultural bias grows thin, and the confidence with which people declare others wrong starts to feel dangerously naive. Yet moral relativism does not ask you to abandon values. It demands humility. It asks you to recognize that moral clarity often comes at the cost of understanding. When you accept that your moral lens is not the only one, empathy becomes unavoidable. You start listening before judging, questioning before condemning. Moral relativism unsettles easy answers and replaces them with discomfort, but within that discomfort lies a deeper awareness of how fragile, powerful, and human morality truly is. Existentialism. Existentialism is the philosophy that begins the moment you realize there is no script waiting for you, no predefined role, no destiny quietly guiding your steps. You arrive in the world without instructions, without a built-in purpose, and without guarantees. Before you are anything, successful or failed, loved or forgotten, you simply exist. Everything else comes later, shaped by your choices and actions. This realization can feel like standing alone under an endless sky, exposed and unprotected. If there is no predetermined meaning, then nothing saves you from responsibility. You are not what you are because of fate, nature, or divine intention. You are what you repeatedly choose to be. Every excuse weakens. Every decision matters. Even doing nothing becomes a choice that defines you. Existentialism forces you to confront freedom in its rawest form. Freedom here is not comforting or liberating at first, it is heavy. It means you cannot hide behind tradition, society, or expectations without lying to yourself. When you follow the crowd without reflection, existentialism calls it self-betrayal. When you deny your freedom, it names it bad faith. The anxiety that follows is not a flaw, it is the price of being truly free. Yet within this weight lies a strange power. If meaning is not given, it can be created. Love matters because you choose it. Values matter because you commit to them. Your life gains intensity because nothing guarantees its worth except your actions. Existentialism does not promise happiness or certainty. It offers something far more unsettling and profound, the truth that your life is yours, completely, and that what you become will always be the result of how honestly you choose to exist. Nihilism. Nihilism is the moment when all the stories collapse. It is the philosophy that declares there is no inherent meaning, no objective value, no ultimate purpose woven into existence. The universe does not care who you are, what you achieve, or how deeply you suffer. It does not reward virtue or punish cruelty. It simply continues, indifferent and unmoved. Nihilism begins where comforting illusions end. For many, this realization arrives like a shock to the nervous system. The goals you were taught to chase, success, legacy, morality, fulfillment, suddenly feel hollow, like props in a play with no audience. If nothing ultimately matters, then why try? Why struggle, love, build, or endure pain? Nihilism strips life of its cosmic justification and leaves you alone with existence itself, raw and unfiltered. This is why nihilism feels dangerous. Without meaning imposed from above, responsibility feels optional. Suffering feels pointless. Achievement feels arbitrary. The mind searches desperately for something solid to cling to and finds only silence. Many recoil from this emptiness, rushing to replace it with belief, distraction, or denial. Yet nihilism is not an ending. It is exposure. It forces you to see reality without guarantees, without promises, without a safety net. In that void, every assumption is questioned. Every value is revealed as something humans invented to survive the weight of awareness. Nihilism does not tell you what to do next. It simply removes the lie that something else was supposed to do it for you. Dualism. Dualism is the haunting idea that you are not one thing, but two. A body made of flesh, bone, and nerve, and a mind that thinks, feels, remembers, and dreams. It begins with an intuition almost impossible to ignore. Your body exists in the physical world, but your inner life feels strangely separate from it. Thoughts have no weight. Emotions have no shape. Memories cannot be touched, yet they feel more real than anything you can hold in your hands. This division creates a quiet mystery at the center of human existence. You can point to your arm, your heart, your brain, but where is yourself? When you close your eyes and listen to your thoughts, it feels as if there is an observer inside you, watching the body from somewhere behind the eyes. Dualism gives language to this experience, suggesting that the mind is not just another physical object, but something fundamentally different, something that cannot be reduced to matter alone. The emotional pull of dualism is powerful because it preserves a sense of depth and meaning. If the mind is more than the body, then consciousness is not just a chemical accident. Love is not just hormones. Pain is not just signals. There is something inward, private, and irreducible about being you. This idea offers comfort in the face of death, suggesting that what you are may not be fully confined to what can decay. But dualism also opens a wound. If mind and body are separate, how do they touch? How does an immaterial thought cause a physical action? How does damage to the brain alter personality so completely? Dualism leaves you suspended between wonder and unease, caught between the feeling that you are more than matter and the fear that this division may never truly make sense. Materialism. Materialism is the stark and uncompromising view that everything that exists is physical, and that reality is ultimately made of matter and energy obeying impersonal laws. Thoughts, emotions, memories, hopes, fears, and even your sense of self are not mysterious forces floating beyond the world, but products of physical processes unfolding inside a biological machine. Your mind is not separate from your body. It is what your body does. This idea can feel cold, even brutal. It strips away comforting notions of souls, higher purposes, and invisible realms watching over human life. Under materialism, there is no hidden meaning behind suffering, no cosmic justice balancing the scales, no eternal essence waiting beyond death. There is only this world, this moment, and the fragile organism experiencing it. Love becomes chemistry. Grief becomes neural patterns. Ambition becomes electrical activity shaped by evolution and environment. Yet materialism also carries a strange kind of intimacy. If your thoughts are physical, then they are woven into the same fabric as stars, oceans, and atoms billions of years old. You are not separate from the universe. You are one of its expressions. Every emotion you feel is a real event happening in real matter, not an illusion or a lesser copy of something higher. Pain matters precisely because it is physical. Joy matters because it leaves traces in the nervous system. Materialism challenges the desire to escape reality and replaces it with an invitation to fully inhabit it. There is no other realm to redeem this one, no afterlife to correct its injustices. What exists is what we have. Meaning, if it appears at all, must emerge from relationships, actions, and experiences grounded in the physical world. In a universe made only of matter, every moment becomes heavier, more fragile, and more urgently alive. Idealism. Idealism is the radical idea that reality, as you experience it, is inseparable from the mind that perceives it. It begins with a quiet but disturbing question. What if the world you believe exists out there is only accessible through consciousness and never independent of it? Every color you see, every sound you hear, every object you touch arrives filtered through perception. Strip perception away, and the solid world you trust begins to dissolve into uncertainty. This philosophy destabilizes the common assumption that matter is primary and the mind merely reacts to it. Idealism turns that order upside down. It suggests that consciousness is not a byproduct of reality, but its foundation. The chair you sit on, the sky you look at, even your own body are known only as experiences within awareness. You never encounter raw reality itself, only your mind's version of it. This realization can feel isolating, almost claustrophobic. If everything is mediated by the mind, then certainty slips through your fingers. You can never step outside perception to confirm what truly exists. The world becomes intimate but fragile, resting on the same awareness that dreams, imagines, and sometimes deceives. The boundary between reality and illusion grows thin, and confidence in an objective, mind-independent world begins to crack. Yet idealism also carries a strange intimacy. If reality is bound to consciousness, then existence is not cold or indifferent. The universe is not something you are thrown into, it unfolds with you. Meaning is no longer something hidden in distant matter, but something arising within experience itself. Idealism does not deny the world, it pulls it closer, forcing you to face the unsettling possibility that reality and awareness are far more deeply intertwined than comfort ever allowed. Empiricism. Empiricism is the belief that knowledge begins in experience, not in ideas handed down by authority or imagined through pure reason. It insists that the world must be touched, seen, heard, and tested before it can be known. Instead of trusting intuition or inherited truths, empiricism demands evidence. If something cannot be observed, measured, or experienced in some way, its claim to truth remains fragile. This philosophy reshapes how you see your own mind. You are not born with understanding already written inside you. You arrive exposed, absorbing reality piece by piece. Every belief you hold is built from accumulated encounters with the world, moments of sensation, repetition, and correction. Empiricism strips knowledge of mysticism and places it firmly in the body, in the senses, in the raw data of lived experience. There is a quiet humility in empiricism. It accepts that the mind is limited, easily mistaken, and prone to illusion. Memory fades, perception deceives, expectations distort what is seen. Because of this, empiricism does not promise certainty. It promises correction. Truth is not something you possess forever, but something you approach gradually, refining it as new evidence appears. Yet this reliance on experience comes with tension. The senses are powerful, but they are not perfect. They can be fooled, manipulated, overwhelmed. Empiricism lives with this vulnerability, choosing fallible observation over comforting certainty. It asks you to trust the world as it appears, while remaining open to the possibility that tomorrow's experience may overturn everything you thought you knew. Rationalism. Rationalism is the belief that the deepest truths about reality are not discovered through the senses, but uncovered through the mind itself. It begins with distrust of appearances, of sensations, of a world that constantly changes and deceives. Your eyes can mislead you, your emotions can distort judgment, and experience can contradict itself. Rationalism turns inward and asks a dangerous question. What can be known with certainty if everything external is questionable? At its core, rationalism places reason above perception. It claims that some knowledge is not learned from the world, but revealed through thinking alone. Mathematical truths, logical principles, and fundamental concepts feel undeniable not because we observe them, but because they are grasped directly by the intellect. Even if the world vanished, these truths would remain intact. This gives rationalism an almost austere confidence, as if the mind carries a quiet blueprint of reality within itself. Emotionally, rationalism offers stability in a chaotic world. When everything feels uncertain, reason becomes an anchor. It promises that clarity is possible, that beneath confusion lies an orderly structure waiting to be understood. For those overwhelmed by noise, contradiction, and manipulation, rationalism feels like refuge, a space where conclusions must follow from premises, where truth cannot bend to opinion or power. Yet rationalism also isolates. To rely on reason alone is to distance oneself from the raw texture of lived experience. Love, fear, beauty, and suffering resist clean logical boundaries. Rationalism risks turning life into an abstract puzzle, elegant but cold. Still, its power remains undeniable. Rationalism insists that thinking is not merely a tool, but a path to truth, and that within the disciplined use of reason lies the possibility of certainty in a world that rarely offers it. Skepticism. Skepticism is the disciplined refusal to accept claims simply because they feel true, familiar, or comforting. It begins with doubt, not as cynicism, but as a protective instinct against illusion. Skepticism asks you to slow down, to question appearances, and to recognize how easily the human mind mistakes belief for knowledge. What you see, what you remember, what you are told, and even what you think you understand may all be flawed, incomplete, or wrong. At its deepest level, skepticism turns inward. It does not only challenge the world, but the mind that interprets it. Memory distorts, perception deceives, emotions bias judgment, and language quietly reshapes reality into something easier to grasp than what truly is. Skepticism exposes how often confidence exceeds evidence, and how certainty can be nothing more than a well-rehearsed habit of belief. This relentless questioning can feel destabilizing. When you pull at the threads of knowledge, entire worldviews begin to unravel. Truth no longer feels solid, it flickers. The more you examine what you know, the more fragile it becomes. Skepticism can isolate you from comforting narratives and shared assumptions, leaving you alone with unanswered questions and uncomfortable ambiguity. Yet skepticism is not paralysis. It is vigilance. It is the refusal to surrender your mind to authority, tradition, or instinct without scrutiny. In a world saturated with persuasion, misinformation, and illusion, skepticism becomes a form of intellectual self-defense. It sharpens awareness and humbles belief, reminding you that wisdom often begins not with answers, but with the courage to say, "I might be wrong." Epistemology. Epistemology is the philosophical confrontation with a question so fundamental, it quietly haunts every belief you hold. How do you know what you know? It pulls you beneath the surface of opinions, assumptions, and certainties, and forces you to examine the fragile foundations they rest on. The moment you begin questioning knowledge itself, confidence starts to wobble. What feels obvious may not be justified, and what feels certain may rest on habit rather than truth. At the center of epistemology is doubt, not the kind that paralyzes, but the kind that exposes. Your senses can deceive you, memory can distort, authority can mislead, even logic can be built on hidden assumptions. Epistemology reveals that much of what you call knowledge is stitched together from trust, inference, and repetition. You believe not because you have proven everything, but because complete proof is impossible. This realization can feel deeply unsettling. If knowledge is uncertain, then certainty itself becomes suspect. You begin to notice how easily humans confuse belief with truth, confidence with accuracy. Entire worldviews can stand on shaky ground, defended not by evidence, but by fear of being wrong. Epistemology forces humility by showing how narrow your access to reality truly is. Yet, epistemology is not a rejection of knowing. It is an invitation to know more carefully. It sharpens the difference between opinion and justified belief, between assumption and understanding. By confronting the limits of knowledge, epistemology makes inquiry more honest and thinking more disciplined. It does not promise absolute certainty, but it teaches you how to navigate uncertainty without surrendering to ignorance, and how to question without losing the courage to believe. Ontology. Ontology is the philosophical confrontation with existence itself. It asks the most fundamental and unsettling question imaginable: what is actually real? Before meaning, before morality, before knowledge, ontology demands that you face being as it is, stripped of assumptions. It pulls you beneath everyday appearances and forces you to examine what truly exists, what merely seems to exist, and what might not exist at all. This inquiry destabilizes the comfort of the ordinary. Objects you take for granted, a chair, a body, a thought, a self, suddenly become mysteries. Are they independent entities or temporary arrangements of something deeper? Is the mind a thing, a process, or an illusion? Ontology exposes how easily we move through life without questioning the nature of what surrounds us, trusting reality simply because it feels solid. What makes ontology emotionally charged is its ability to dissolve certainty. The more deeply you question existence, the less obvious it becomes. Reality stops feeling fixed and begins to feel fragile, layered, even negotiable. You realize that what you call real depends on hidden assumptions about time, identity, substance, and change. Remove those assumptions, and the ground beneath your understanding starts to shift. Ontology is not abstract curiosity, it is existential pressure. If the nature of being is uncertain, then so is your place within it. You are forced to ask whether you are a stable self or a temporary configuration, whether existence has depth or is only surface. Ontology does not give reassurance. It exposes how thin the line is between something and nothing, and how easily the familiar world can dissolve into questions you can never fully escape. Teleology. Teleology is the deeply human impulse to believe that things exist for something, that events are not merely happening, but unfolding toward an end. It is the idea that purpose is woven into reality itself, that actions, objects, and even lives are directed toward goals rather than drifting aimlessly through cause and effect. Teleology feels intuitive because the human mind is built to search for reasons, not just explanations. We do not only ask how something happened, we ask why it happened. This way of thinking shapes how people understand themselves. A heart is not just a pump, it exists to sustain life. A seed is not merely matter reacting to sunlight and soil, it is striving to become a tree. In the same way, people often feel that their struggles, talents, and failures are pointing towards something meaningful, as if their lives are moving in the direction of an unseen destination. Teleology gives suffering a narrative, turning pain into preparation and uncertainty into anticipation. Emotionally, teleology offers comfort against chaos. A world governed only by blind forces feels unbearable to many, but a world guided by purpose feels intelligible, even merciful. When things go wrong, teleological thinking whispers that it happened for a reason, that setbacks are steps rather than dead ends. This belief can sustain hope in moments where logic alone provides none. Yet teleology also carries a quiet danger. When purpose is assumed, it can blind us to reality as it is. We may impose meaning where none exists, forcing events into stories that soothe rather than reveal truth. Teleology sits at the fragile boundary between insight and illusion, between the need for purpose and the fear of a meaninglessness. It reflects the human refusal to accept a universe that simply happens without caring where it leads. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is the moral philosophy that shifts attention away from rules and consequences and places it squarely on the kind of person you are becoming. Instead of asking what action is right or what outcome is best, it asks a more intimate and unsettling question: what does this choice turn you into? Morality, in this view, is not a checklist to follow or a calculation to perform, but a lifelong process of shaping character through repeated action. At the heart of virtue ethics is the idea that who you are is built slowly, almost invisibly, through habit. Courage, honesty, patience, and compassion are not switches you flip in moments of crisis. They are traits cultivated through countless small decisions made when no one is watching. Every choice leaves a trace, reinforcing patterns that harden into character over time. You do not simply act bravely once and become brave. You practice bravery until it becomes part of you. This perspective makes morality deeply personal and inescapable. There are no shortcuts, no loopholes, and no moral hiding places behind rules or intentions. Even when the outcome is good, a corrupt motive still shapes you. Even when no harm is done, a selfish habit still grows. Virtue ethics exposes how easy it is to focus on appearing moral while quietly becoming something else. At the same time, virtue ethics is profoundly hopeful. It treats moral failure not as permanent condemnation, but as evidence of unfinished character. You are always in the process of becoming. Each moment offers another chance to practice being the kind of person you respect. In this view, ethics is not about perfection, but about direction, repetition, and the slow construction of a life worth living. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the moral framework that asks you to measure right and wrong by consequences alone. stripping morality down to a single, relentless question. Does this action increase overall happiness or reduce suffering? Intentions, traditions, and personal loyalties fade into the background as outcomes take center stage. What matters is not how an action feels, but what it produces when it ripples outward into the lives of others. This way of thinking can feel brutally logical. It demands that you step outside yourself and view morality from a cold, almost mathematical distance. One person's pain may be justified if it prevents greater pain for many. One sacrifice may be required to secure collective well-being. Utilitarianism forces you to confront moral trade-offs that instinctively feel wrong, yet seem difficult to argue against when suffering is weighed at scale. The emotional tension arises when human lives become numbers in a calculation. Faces blur into totals. Individual dignity collides with collective benefit. Utilitarianism exposes how easily compassion can transform into cold efficiency, and how moral certainty can hide uncomfortable costs. You begin to realize that doing the most good does not always feel good, and that moral clarity often demands emotional discomfort. Yet utilitarianism also carries a powerful moral urgency. It refuses to let moral decisions be guided by habit, tradition, or personal comfort. It asks you to consider consequences beyond your immediate circle, to recognize invisible suffering, and to take responsibility for the broader impact of your choices. Every action becomes a moral weight placed on the future, forcing you to confront the uncomfortable truth that in a world of limited resources, choosing not to maximize good is itself a moral decision. Deontology. Deontology is the moral philosophy built on duty rather than desire, outcome, or emotion. It begins with the belief that some actions are right or wrong in themselves, regardless of what they lead to. In a world obsessed with results, deontology draws a hard line and asks a more demanding question. Not what will happen if you act, but whether you are permitted to act at all. This way of thinking places immense weight on moral rules. Promises matter because they are promises. Lying is wrong, not because it causes harm, but because it violates a principle. Deontology forces you to confront the idea that morality is not flexible, not negotiable, and not designed to make life easier. It demands integrity, even when breaking the rule would lead to a better outcome. That demand is what makes it feel both noble and brutal. Emotionally, deontology is heavy. It refuses to let sympathy override obligation. It asks you to act correctly even when every instinct pulls you in the opposite direction. You may save fewer people, cause more pain, or sacrifice personal happiness, all in the name of honoring a rule that does not bend. The cost of moral purity becomes painfully visible. At its core, deontology treats human beings as ends, not tools. It insists that using someone as a means to achieve a goal, even a good one, crosses a moral boundary that cannot be justified. This insistence creates a cold clarity. Deontology does not promise comfort or approval. It offers something harsher: the demand to stand by your principles even when doing so feels unbearable, even when the world punishes you for being morally consistent. The Trolley Problem. The Trolley Problem is a moral thought experiment that drags you into a moment where doing nothing is itself a choice. A runaway trolley is speeding toward a group of people tied to the tracks. You stand by a lever. If you pull it, the trolley will switch tracks and kill one person instead. If you do nothing, several will die. There is no escape, no third option, no time to negotiate, only action or inaction, both stained with blood. What makes the trolley problem so disturbing is not the scenario itself, but what it exposes about you. The moment you imagine your hand on the lever, morality stops being abstract. Numbers clash with instincts. Logic argues for minimizing deaths, while emotion recoils at the idea of actively causing harm. Pulling the lever feels like murder. Not pulling it feels like cowardice. Either way, innocence is lost. This problem fractures moral certainty. If saving more lives is good, why does intentionally killing feel worse than allowing deaths to happen? The distinction between causing harm and allowing harm suddenly becomes unbearable. Your mind searches for rules, but every rule breaks under pressure. Utilitarian calculations feel cold. Moral absolutes feel helpless. The emotional weight of the trolley problem comes from responsibility. Once you intervene, the outcome carries your fingerprint. The deaths are no longer an accident of fate, but a consequence of your judgment. It forces you to confront a terrifying truth. Moral purity may be impossible in a world where every choice closes off other lives. The trolley problem does not test intelligence. It tests what you are willing to live with. It reveals how fragile moral confidence becomes when every available option makes you complicit, and silence itself becomes an act with consequences. Social contract. The social contract is the invisible agreement that quietly shapes nearly every aspect of your life, even though you never signed it and were never asked for consent. It begins with the idea that life in its raw, unstructured form is chaotic, dangerous, and unstable. To escape that chaos, individuals give up certain freedoms in exchange for security, order, and cooperation. You obey laws, respect boundaries, and follow rules not because they are natural, but because collective survival depends on restraint. This concept reframes society as a fragile bargain rather than a moral inevitability. Rights are not gifts from the universe. They are permissions granted by mutual agreement. Safety exists only because people collectively decide that violence will be punished. Property exists because others agree not to take what you claim as yours. Even authority itself is not sacred, but borrowed, tolerated only as long as it serves the agreement. The unsettling power of the social contract lies in its conditional nature. If society protects you, you comply. If it fails, the obligation begins to crack. This raises dangerous questions. What happens when laws become unjust? When institutions protect some while sacrificing others? When obedience demands silence in the face of harm? The social contract forces you to confront the tension between order and conscience. At the same time, it exposes how deeply dependent you are on others. Every ordinary moment, walking safely, trusting strangers, planning a future, rests on millions of people continuing to honor an agreement they could abandon at any time. Civilization is not guaranteed. It is maintained daily through collective restraint. The social contract is not a promise of fairness, but a reminder that stability is always temporary, negotiated, and one violation away from unraveling. Tabula Rasa. Tabula Rasa is the haunting idea that the human mind begins as a blank slate, empty of knowledge, beliefs, and moral tendencies. At birth, nothing is written. No destiny, no character, no built-in meaning. Everything you become is slowly etched into you by experience, environment, and interaction. Who you are is not discovered, but constructed, shaped by forces that begin acting on you long before you are aware of them. This concept quietly shifts how you see identity and responsibility. If the mind starts empty, then personality is not fate, but accumulation. Your fears, values, ambitions, and limitations may trace back to moments you barely remember, words spoken to you, love withheld, patterns repeated. Tabula Rasa exposes how deeply the world writes itself into you, often without your consent. You are, in many ways, the result of what happened to you. There is something deeply unsettling in realizing how little of yourself may be original. If different circumstances had surrounded you, You might believe differently, desire differently, even love differently. The self begins to feel fragile, almost accidental, shaped by chance encounters and social conditioning rather than inner essence. Yet within this vulnerability lies possibility. If nothing is written at the start, then nothing is permanently fixed. Learning, reflection, and change become acts of rewriting. Tabula Rasa suggests that growth is not betrayal of who you are, but continuation of becoming. It frames identity as a living process rather than a static truth, reminding you that even if the world wrote the first lines of your story, you still carry the pen, capable of revision, resistance, and transformation as new experiences continue to leave their mark. Cogito Ergo Sum. Cogito Ergo Sum, meaning I think, therefore I am, is the radical realization that thought itself is undeniable proof of existence. Everything else can be questioned. The world may be an illusion. Memories may be false. The body may be deceiving you. But the very act of doubting confirms one thing with absolute certainty. Something is doing the doubting. Thought becomes the last solid ground when all other certainty collapses. This idea emerges from extreme skepticism. Imagine stripping away every belief you have ever held about reality, identity, even time itself. One by one, each assumption falls apart under doubt. Senses can lie. Dreams can feel real. Logic can be manipulated. Yet in the middle of that collapse, awareness remains. Even if everything is false, the experience of thinking cannot be denied while it is happening. What makes this realization so powerful is how isolating it is. It places you alone with your consciousness, cut off from the world you assumed was real. You exist not because you are seen, touched, or remembered, but because you are aware. Existence shrinks down to a single point of certainty, the thinking self, floating in a sea of uncertainty. Cogito ergo sum does not prove who you are, where you are, or what reality is made of. It proves something far more unsettling, that consciousness arrives before everything else. Identity, meaning, and truth must be rebuilt from this fragile foundation. The self becomes undeniable, but the world becomes suspect. In realizing that thought confirms existence, you also realize how thin and lonely certainty truly is when stripped of everything else you once trusted. Solipsism. Solipsism is the most isolating thought a mind can turn against itself. It is the idea that only your own consciousness can be known to exist with certainty, and that everything else, the people around you, the world you move through, even history itself, may be nothing more than appearances within your mind. Other faces speak, laugh, suffer, and claim inner lives of their own, yet solipsism whispers that you can never truly step inside them. You only ever experience your own thoughts, sensations, and perceptions, locked behind the walls of your awareness. This idea cuts deep because it attacks the foundation of connection. If you cannot know that other minds exist, then every relationship becomes fragile. Love could be a projection. Empathy could be a performance your mind stages for itself. Even disagreement loses its force because the other may not be real in the way you are real. Solipsism turns the world into a stage set, convincing in detail, but potentially empty behind the scenes. The emotional weight of solipsism is suffocating. It traps you in the present moment of your own experience with no guarantee of escape. Memories become private echoes. Conversations become one-sided mysteries. You can never fully prove that anyone else feels pain, joy, fear, or hope the way you do. This realization can feel like standing alone in an infinite room, shouting into the dark and only hearing your own voice return. Yet solipsism is not usually embraced. It is endured. It lingers as a philosophical wound, a doubt that cannot be completely sealed. Most people live as if others are real, because life demands it. But solipsism remains in the background, reminding you that consciousness is lonely by nature and that every connection you experience is built on trust rather than certainty. Phenomenology. Phenomenology is the philosophy that turns attention away from theories, explanations, and abstractions and forces you to confront experience exactly as it appears to you. It begins with a radical shift in focus. Instead of asking what the world is in itself, it asks how the world shows up in consciousness. Before science, before language, before interpretation, there is the raw fact of experience, seeing, hearing, feeling, remembering, fearing, hoping. Phenomenology insists that this lived reality is not secondary, but foundational. This approach exposes how easily we overlook the strangeness of being conscious. You do not encounter objects as neutral data, you encounter them as meaningful, colored by mood, memory, and expectation. A room can feel safe or threatening, a face can feel familiar or alien, time can drag or collapse, all without anything objectively changing. Phenomenology reveals that the world you live in is not just out there, but inseparable from how it is experienced. By suspending assumptions about what things really are, phenomenology strips away habits of thought that usually go unquestioned. It asks you to notice how perception is structured, how attention shifts, how meaning forms before words ever appear. This can feel disorienting, like stepping outside your own mind while still trapped inside it. The ordinary becomes uncanny. What once felt automatic begins to feel deliberate and fragile. At its deepest level, phenomenology confronts you with the intimacy of existence. There is no distance between you and your experience. You are always inside it. You never access reality directly, only reality as it is given to you. This realization does not lead to escape or certainty, but to awareness. It forces you to recognize that every truth you claim begins not with the world, but with the way the world is lived. Hedonism. Hedonism is the philosophy that places pleasure at the center of human existence, arguing that what ultimately drives us is the pursuit of enjoyment and the avoidance of pain. Beneath every ambition, every relationship, every sacrifice, there is the quiet pull of feeling good, of seeking satisfaction, comfort, and relief from suffering. Hedonism strips away moral pretenses and asks you to confront a simple truth. Much of what you do is motivated by how it makes you feel. This idea can feel both honest and unsettling. Society often praises self-control, duty, and sacrifice, yet hedonism exposes how deeply pleasure guides behavior, even when it hides behind noble language. Success feels rewarding. Love feels intoxicating. Recognition feels validating. Even acts of generosity often come with emotional payoff. Hedonism suggests that pleasure is not a weakness in human nature, but its engine. The tension emerges when pleasure becomes the highest good. Short-term gratification can quietly undermine long-term well-being. What feels good now may hollow you out later. Addiction, excess, and numb repetition lurk in the shadows of unchecked indulgence. Hedonism forces you to ask whether pleasure is something to be consumed endlessly or something to be understood, refined, and balanced. Yet hedonism is not merely reckless indulgence. At its core, it challenges the glorification of suffering. It questions why pain is often romanticized as meaningful, while pleasure is dismissed as shallow. Hedonism insists that joy matters, that happiness is not something to apologize for, and that a life deprived of pleasure is not virtuous, but diminished. It places feeling at the center of existence, daring you to examine whether the way you seek pleasure is truly serving you or quietly controlling you. Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is the idea that a good life is not defined by pleasure, success, or constant happiness, but by deep, sustained flourishing. It points toward a way of living that feels meaningful from the inside, even when it is difficult, uncomfortable, or demanding. Rather than asking what feels good in the moment, Eudaimonia asks what kind of life is worthy of being lived over time. This concept challenges the modern obsession with quick satisfaction. Pleasure fades, achievements lose their shine, and external rewards never stay fulfilling for long. Eudaimonia shifts the focus inward, toward character, purpose, and alignment between who you are and how you live. It suggests that fulfillment is not something you chase, but something that emerges when your actions reflect your values and your potential is actively expressed. There is an emotional weight to eudaimonia because it demands responsibility for one's own growth. It is not passive happiness that arrives by luck. It is cultivated through effort, discipline, and self-examination. Living well requires choosing what strengthens you over what merely comforts you, and accepting struggle as part of becoming fully human, rather than something to be avoided at all costs. Eudaimonia also reframes suffering. Pain, failure, and sacrifice are no longer signs that life is going wrong, but signals that something meaningful is being pursued. A flourishing life is not free from hardship. It is shaped by it. In this view, the highest form of happiness is not emotional highs, but the quiet sense that your life is unfolding in the right direction, even when the path is steep and uncertain. Altruism. Altruism is the quiet, unsettling idea that a person can act for the sake of others with no expectation of reward. It challenges the suspicion that every good deed hides a selfish motive, that kindness is always a transaction waiting to be paid back. Altruism asks whether it is possible to give something, time, safety, comfort, even life itself, without gaining anything in return, not even pride. At its emotional core, altruism is about self-transcendence. It is the moment when concern for another person overrides instinct, fear, or advantage. A stranger helps without being seen. A sacrifice is made with no audience. In these moments, the self loosens its grip, and the boundary between me and you begins to blur. Altruism feels almost irrational because it defies the logic of survival and competition that seems to govern so much of life. This is why altruism unsettles people. If humans are capable of genuine selflessness, then cynicism collapses. Power, greed, and self-interest no longer explain everything. Altruism exposes a vulnerability in the idea that people are fundamentally selfish. It suggests that empathy can be strong enough to override calculation, that suffering witnessed in another can feel unbearable even when it costs us to respond. Yet altruism also raises uncomfortable questions. Is a good act still altruistic if it makes you feel good? If compassion is wired into the brain, is selflessness just another form of biology rewarding itself? The purity of altruism is constantly under suspicion, examined, doubted, and dissected. Still, when altruism appears, it cuts through theory. In moments of real sacrifice, explanations feel small. Someone helps because someone else needs help, and for a brief moment, the world becomes less about the self and more about shared fragility. Egoism. Egoism is the philosophy that places the self at the center of all motivation, arguing that every action, no matter how generous it appears, is ultimately driven by self-interest. It suggests that beneath kindness, sacrifice, loyalty, and even love, there is a quieter force at work: the desire to gain pleasure, avoid pain, protect identity, or preserve a sense of meaning. According to egoism, we do not act for others purely. We act because doing so satisfies something within us. This idea can feel deeply uncomfortable because it challenges how people like to see themselves. We tell stories about selflessness and moral purity, yet egoism asks you to look closer. When you help someone, does it ease guilt, earn approval, strengthen belonging, or reinforce your self-image as a good person? When you suffer for others, does the sacrifice affirm your values or give your pain a purpose? Egoism does not accuse, it exposes. It insists that motives are rarely as clean as they appear. Egoism reframes morality as strategy rather than virtue. Decisions become calculations of benefit, even when the benefit is emotional or psychological rather than material. This makes human behavior feel predictable, almost mechanical, driven by internal reward systems shaped by evolution and experience. Altruism begins to look like a sophisticated form of self-maintenance rather than moral transcendence. Yet egoism also carries a sharp honesty. It strips away moral theater and forces confrontation with desire as it actually operates. It challenges you to ask whether denying self-interest makes you moral or simply dishonest. By acknowledging the self as a constant presence in every choice, egoism pushes you to understand your motivations instead of hiding behind idealized narratives. In doing so, it reveals a quieter truth. The self is never absent, even when you try to forget it. Compatibilism. Compatibilism is the attempt to reconcile two ideas that seem fundamentally at odds: determinism and free will. It begins with the unsettling acceptance that the world may be governed by cause and effect, that every event has prior conditions shaping it. Yet instead of concluding that freedom is an illusion, compatibilism quietly redefines what freedom actually means. Rather than demanding absolute independence from causation, compatibilism suggests that free will exists when your actions flow from your own internal states, your desires, beliefs, intentions, and values, even if those states themselves have causes. You are not free because nothing influences you. You are free because what influences you is you. The choice feels yours not because it escapes the causal chain, but because it aligns with who you are. This reframing carries emotional weight. It rescues responsibility without pretending you are a detached, self-created being. You are shaped, but not puppeteered, influenced, but not erased. Compatibilism allows accountability to survive in a determined world by focusing on coercion rather than causation. When you act under threat or force, freedom vanishes. When you act according to your own reasons, freedom remains, even if those reasons have a history. There is something quietly sobering about this view. It denies the fantasy of total control while preserving meaningful agency. You are not the origin of yourself, but you are the expression of yourself. Compatibilism asks you to stop searching for freedom outside the system and instead recognize it within the structure of cause and effect. Freedom becomes less about metaphysical escape and more about ownership, about acting in a way that reflects your character, even knowing that your character did not arise from nothing. Hard determinism. Hard determinism is the uncompromising claim that free will does not exist at all. It asserts that every thought, desire, and action is fully caused by prior events, leaving no room for genuine choice. From the moment the universe began, every outcome, including you, your personality, and every decision you believe you make, was already set in motion. What feels like freedom is simply the mind experiencing causes it cannot see. This idea strikes at the core of personal identity. If you could never have acted differently, then the sense of authorship over your life begins to dissolve. Praise and blame lose their traditional meaning. Success stops feeling earned. Guilt starts to feel misplaced. Hard determinism forces you to confront the possibility that you are less an independent agent and more a point where countless forces temporarily converge. Emotionally, this realization can feel suffocating. The language of should have and could have collapses under scrutiny. Regret becomes a strange illusion because nothing else was ever possible. Even resistance to this idea is itself determined, another predictable response in the chain. There is no escape hatch within the system. Yet hard determinism also exposes a brutal honesty about the human condition. It removes moral grandstanding and replaces it with explanation. People act as they do because they could not do otherwise. Understanding replaces judgment. Behavior becomes something to study rather than condemn. Hard determinism does not offer comfort or meaning. It offers a stark mirror, reflecting a universe where freedom is a feeling, not a fact, and where your sense of control may be nothing more than a byproduct of causes unfolding through you. Libertarian free will. Libertarian free will is the bold and defiant claim that your choices are not fully determined by the past, your biology, or the laws of nature. It insists that when you decide, you are not merely acting out a script written by prior causes, but initiating something genuinely new in the universe. In that moment of choice, the future is open, and multiple outcomes are truly possible. You could have done otherwise, and that fact matters. This idea carries enormous emotional weight because it places the burden of authorship squarely on you. If libertarian free will is true, then your life is not the inevitable result of circumstances. You are not just shaped by forces. You are a force. Your decisions cut into the causal chain rather than merely extending it. Every commitment, betrayal, act of courage, or a moment of hesitation becomes deeply personal, not as an echo of the past, but as an origin point. Libertarian free will makes responsibility unavoidable. Praise and blame stop being convenient labels and become serious judgments about who you chose to be. Regret becomes sharper because it is no longer about bad luck or conditioning, but about roads you freely refused or embraced. The freedom it promises is intoxicating, but it is also terrifying because there is nowhere to hide when things go wrong. At the same time, this view stands in constant tension with science and psychology. Patterns, causes, and influences surround every decision, pressing in from all sides. Libertarian free will does not deny these pressures. It claims that they do not fully decide for you. It lives in the narrow, fragile space where influence ends and authorship begins. Whether that space truly exists is uncertain, but the feeling of standing there, choosing without guarantee, is one of the most powerful experiences of being human. Moral absolutism. Moral absolutism is the unwavering belief that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of context, intention, or consequence. It draws a hard line through reality and declares that morality does not bend for circumstance, culture, or emotion. Under this view, truth in ethics is not negotiated or interpreted. It is discovered and obeyed. Some acts are wrong even if everyone approves of them, and some acts are right even if the world condemns them. This philosophy offers a powerful sense of certainty. In a chaotic world filled with moral gray zones, moral absolutism promises solid ground. It reassures you that justice is not a matter of opinion and that moral confusion is not inevitable. There is comfort in believing that right and wrong exist independently of human weakness, immune to rationalization or convenience. It allows judgment to feel clean and decisive. But this certainty comes at a cost. Moral absolutism can be merciless. When rules are sacred, compassion becomes secondary. Context becomes irrelevant. A good intention cannot redeem a forbidden act, and a tragic situation cannot excuse a moral violation. This rigidity can feel noble, but it can also feel inhuman, demanding obedience, even when obedience causes suffering. Moral absolutism also places a heavy burden on those who claim to know moral truth. If the rules are absolute, then disagreement is not misunderstanding but error. This belief can harden into moral arrogance, where certainty replaces reflection and conviction silences doubt. Yet for those who embrace it, Moral absolutism is not about cruelty, but about loyalty to principles that do not shift when pressure mounts. It is the belief that without unbreakable moral boundaries, anything can be justified, and that some lines must never be crossed, no matter the cost. Natural law. Natural law is the idea that morality is not invented by societies or written into existence by authorities, but discovered within the structure of human nature itself. It suggests that right and wrong are woven into what we are, embedded in our instincts, capacities, and fundamental needs. Long before laws are written or cultures emerge, natural law claims that certain moral truths already exist, waiting to be recognized rather than created. This concept carries a powerful emotional pull because it promises moral stability in a chaotic world. If morality is rooted in nature, then it is not arbitrary. Justice is not merely a social agreement, and goodness is not a shifting opinion. Natural law offers the reassurance that beneath changing customs and beliefs, there is a deeper moral order that remains constant, quietly guiding human behavior toward what fulfills our nature and away from what destroys it. Yet this promise comes with tension. If morality is grounded in human nature, then failing morally is not just a mistake, it is a violation of what we are meant to be. Natural law frames ethical failure as a form of self-betrayal, a turning away from the conditions that allow humans to flourish. This can feel heavy, even unforgiving, because it ties moral wrongdoing to a rejection of one's own essence. At the same time, natural law challenges moral relativism by insisting that not all values are equal. Some actions harm human flourishing, regardless of culture or intention. By rooting ethics in the shared structure of humanity, natural law claims that moral reasoning is not about preference, but about understanding what kind of beings we are and what allows us to live fully. It frames morality not as obedience, but as alignment with the deeper logic of human existence. Pragmatism. Pragmatism is the philosophy that refuses to worship truth in abstraction, and instead asks a more grounded, uncomfortable question: does it work? Rather than chasing absolute certainty or timeless principles, pragmatism measures ideas by their effects in the real world. A belief is not valuable because it sounds elegant or feels profound, but because it helps you navigate life, solve problems, and move forward without collapsing under theory. This approach disrupts the desire for final answers. Pragmatism accepts that reality is messy, incomplete, and constantly changing. What works today may fail tomorrow, and that failure does not mean the idea was false. It means the situation has shifted. Truth becomes something flexible, shaped by experience, revision, and consequence, rather than discovered once and preserved forever. Emotionally, pragmatism offers both relief and responsibility. It releases you from the pressure of being perfectly right, but it demands that you pay attention to results. You cannot hide behind ideology when harm appears, and you cannot cling to beliefs that no longer serve their purpose. Pragmatism quietly insists that intellectual honesty means adaptation, not loyalty. At its core, pragmatism respects human limitation. It recognizes that we do not see the world as it is, only as it appears through our needs, tools, and context. Ideas are instruments, not sacred objects. They exist to be used, tested, and discarded if necessary. Pragmatism does not promise certainty or moral purity. It asks you to stay awake to consequences, to remain open to change, and to judge beliefs not by how true they feel, but by how well they help you live within an unpredictable world. Postmodernism. Postmodernism is the slow dismantling of certainty. It emerges from the suspicion that the stories we rely on to explain the world, truth, progress, identity, morality, are not timeless foundations, but constructions shaped by power, language, and perspective. Where earlier ways of thinking searched for universal answers, postmodernism asks who gets to decide what counts as truth in the first place, and who benefits when one version of reality is treated as unquestionable. At its emotional core, postmodernism feels destabilizing. It pulls the ground out from under grand narratives that once gave people direction and confidence. History no longer marches toward progress. It fractures into competing interpretations. Knowledge stops feeling neutral and starts looking political. Even the self becomes uncertain, less a fixed identity and more a shifting collection of roles, stories, and influences. This uncertainty can feel liberating or deeply unsettling. On one hand, postmodernism exposes hidden assumptions and challenges oppressive systems that claim to be natural or objective. It gives voice to perspectives that were previously dismissed, revealing how much of what we call truth is shaped by culture, language, and power structures. It invites skepticism toward authority and encourages constant questioning. On the other hand, postmodernism erodes trust. If every claim is just a narrative, then conviction weakens, meaning feels unstable. The fear emerges that nothing can be fully believed, defended, or relied upon. Irony replaces sincerity. Distance replaces commitment. Postmodernism does not offer comfort or resolution. It offers exposure. It forces you to live in a world where certainty is suspect and meaning is negotiated rather than discovered. It keeps pulling apart the stories you lean on, not to replace them with better ones, but to remind you that all stories are fragile, provisional, and shaped by the hands that tell them. Structuralism. Structuralism is the unsettling realization that meaning does not originate within things themselves, but emerges from the hidden systems that organize them. Words, beliefs, identities, and even thoughts gain significance not because of what they are, but because of how they relate to everything else. You do not understand the world directly. You understand it through structures, patterns, rules, and oppositions that operate beneath awareness, quietly shaping how reality appears. This philosophy pulls the self off its pedestal. What feels like personal insight or individual expression is often the product of larger frameworks you did not create. Language tells you how to think before you ever choose a thought. Cultural categories divide the world into binaries: normal and abnormal, sacred and profane, masculine and feminine, long before you question them. Structuralism exposes how these invisible systems limit imagination while making understanding possible at all. The disturbing power of structuralism lies in how little freedom it seems to leave behind. If meaning is produced by systems, then originality becomes rearrangement rather than creation. Even rebellion borrows the structure it tries to oppose. You speak through language, desire through culture, and interpret experience through inherited frameworks that feel natural only because they are deeply ingrained. Yet structuralism does not deny meaning. It relocates it. It asks you to stop looking for truth inside isolated objects or individuals and start noticing the patterns that bind everything together. Once you see these structures, the world begins to feel less spontaneous and more scripted, less personal and more systemic. Awareness becomes unsettling because it reveals how much of what you call reality is assembled before you ever arrive to experience it. Relativism. Relativism is the idea that truth, meaning, and value do not exist as fixed realities independent of human perspective. Instead, they shift depending on context, culture, language, and individual experience. What feels undeniably true to one person may feel false or even absurd to another, not because one is ignorant, but because each stands within a different framework for understanding the world. This perspective quietly dismantles the comfort of certainty. Relativism exposes how deeply beliefs are shaped by where and when you are born. by the stories you are told, and by the assumptions you inherit without noticing. It reveals that many convictions feel universal only because they are familiar. Once this realization takes hold, confidence begins to fracture. The sharp line between truth and opinion blurs, and the authority with which people declare, "This is how things are," starts to feel fragile. The emotional tension of relativism lies in its humility. It forces you to confront the possibility that your worldview is not a privileged vantage point, but one lens among many. Moral outrage, intellectual certainty, and cultural superiority all become harder to sustain. Relativism makes judgment uncomfortable because it demands awareness of your own bias before condemning others. Yet relativism does not dissolve meaning into emptiness. It shifts meaning inward toward interpretation and dialogue. Understanding becomes an act of translation rather than conquest. Relativism encourages listening over asserting, curiosity over dominance. It reveals that disagreement is not always a battle between truth and falsehood, but often a collision of perspectives shaped by different lives. Living with relativism means accepting uncertainty as a permanent condition and learning to navigate a world where certainty feels powerful, but understanding requires restraint. Metaphysics. Metaphysics is the attempt to look behind reality and ask what is really there when appearances are stripped away. It reaches beyond what can be seen or measured and presses into questions that refuse to stay quiet. What is existence made of? Why there is something rather than nothing, and what it even means for something to be real. Metaphysics begins where certainty ends and curiosity becomes unsettling. This way of thinking destabilizes the ordinary world. Objects stop being simple things and become puzzles. Time may not flow the way it feels. Identity may not be fixed. Cause and effect may not be as straightforward as they seem. Metaphysics reveals that the framework holding your reality together is thinner and stranger than everyday life suggests, built on assumptions you rarely question but constantly rely on. There is an emotional pull to metaphysics because it touches the edges of meaning. When you ask what reality ultimately is, you also ask what you are within it. Are you a body, a mind, a process, or a temporary pattern? Is the universe governed by necessity, chance, or something beyond both? Each answer shifts how existence feels, not just how it is described. Metaphysics does not offer practical comfort. It removes the ground beneath easy explanations and replaces it with deeper uncertainty, yet that uncertainty carries intensity. To engage with metaphysics is to accept that reality may never fully make sense, that the deepest questions may not have final answers. What remains is the awareness that beneath the surface of everyday life lies a structure so vast and strange that simply existing within it is already a philosophical act. Identity theory. Identity theory is the stark claim that your mind is not something separate from your body, but identical to it. Your thoughts, emotions, memories, and sense of self are not hidden forces floating above the brain. They are the brain. Every feeling you cherish and every thought you fear corresponds to physical processes unfolding inside neural tissue. There is no extra layer, no inner substance beyond matter itself. This idea strikes at the heart of how people experience themselves. When you feel love or pain, it does not feel like electricity and chemistry. It feels intimate, private, and deeply personal. Identity theory insists that this intimacy is still physical, that the warmth of love and the sting of loss are nothing more and nothing less than biological activity. The mind does not ride on the brain. It is the brain, seen from the inside. Emotionally, this can feel like a loss. If consciousness is just neural firing, then the mystery of the inner life seems to dissolve into mechanics. Meaning feels threatened. The self begins to look fragile, dependent on a delicate organ that can be altered, damaged, or erased. A blow to the head, a chemical imbalance, or a degenerative disease can change who you are, not metaphorically, but literally. Yet identity theory also offers a strange clarity. It removes the gap between mind and world, placing human experience firmly within nature rather than outside it. You are not a ghost trapped in a machine. You are a living system thinking, feeling, and perceiving as matter organizes itself in complex ways. Identity theory forces you to confront how physical you truly are and how thin the line is between the person you know yourself to be and the fragile biological structure that sustains that knowing. Panpsychism. Panpsychism is the radical and haunting idea that consciousness is not exclusive to human minds or complex brains, but is a fundamental feature of reality itself. According to this view, the universe is not made of dead matter that somehow produces awareness by accident. Instead, even the smallest pieces of existence carry some primitive form of experience. Consciousness does not suddenly appear at a certain level of complexity. It has always been there, woven into the fabric of being. This philosophy unsettles the comfortable divide between the living and the non-living. If consciousness is everywhere, then the world is not a silent machine, but a field of countless inner perspectives, however faint or unfamiliar they may be. Stones, particles, and forces are no longer purely inert. They are participants in existence rather than empty objects. The loneliness of being conscious in an indifferent universe begins to crack. Panpsychism emerges from a deep discomfort with the idea that awareness simply pops into existence from lifeless matter. How does something utterly non-conscious give rise to subjective experience at all? Rather than treating consciousness as an anomaly, panpsychism treats it as a basic ingredient, like mass or charge. This reframes the mystery. Instead of asking how consciousness appears, it asks how simple forms of experience combine into the rich inner worlds humans know. There is something both comforting and disturbing in this view. Comforting because it suggests you are not alone in awareness, that experience is not an accident trapped inside skulls. Disturbing because it dissolves the boundary between self and world. If consciousness is everywhere, then the universe is not something you observe from the outside. You are immersed in it, surrounded by being that feels in ways you may never fully understand. Presentism. Presentism is the haunting idea that only this moment truly exists. The past is gone, the future is unreal, and everything you believe gives your life continuity is held together by memory and expectation rather than reality itself. According to presentism, yesterday no longer exists in any meaningful way, and tomorrow has not yet come into being. There is only now, endlessly replacing itself, vanishing the instant you try to hold it. This view radically reshapes how time is felt. Memories that feel vivid and alive are revealed as mental echoes, not surviving pieces of reality. Regrets have no physical place to exist except in your mind. Future plans, hopes, and fears are not waiting for you somewhere ahead. They are imagined constructions hovering over a present that is all you ever actually touch. Presentism strips time of its comforting continuity and replaces it with constant disappearance. There is something deeply unsettling about this. If only the present exists, then every moment dies as soon as it arrives. Nothing endures. Your happiest experiences no longer exist. Your worst suffering is not preserved anywhere. Even your identity becomes fragile, stitched together by memories that have no real existence outside consciousness. The self begins to feel like a story, constantly rewritten in a moment that refuses to stay still. Yet presentism also carries an intense emotional weight. If the present is all that exists, then it becomes infinitely valuable. There is no other time to live in, no future realm where meaning waits to begin. Everything that matters must matter now. Attention becomes existence itself. Presentism forces you into radical immediacy, confronting the truth that life is not something stretched across time, but something that only ever happens once, again and again, in a fleeting present that is always slipping away. Eternalism. Eternalism is the disturbing idea that time does not truly pass, and that past, present, and future all exist equally and permanently. According to this view, every moment that has ever happened and every moment that will ever happen is already real, laid out like a vast landscape. What you call now is not special in the structure of reality. It is simply the point your consciousness happens to occupy. This thought quietly dismantles how life feels from the inside. We experience time as flowing, as something moving forward, carrying us away from the past and toward the future. Eternalism claims this feeling is an illusion created by awareness, not a feature of reality itself. Your childhood, this moment, and your death all exist simultaneously, frozen in their own positions, untouched by the sensation of passing. Emotionally, eternalism is unsettling because it changes the meaning of loss and anticipation. If the past still exists, then nothing is ever truly gone. Every joy, every mistake, every moment of love and pain is eternally preserved. At the same time, the future is already there, waiting, fixed in place. The idea that events are already real long before you experience them can feel like fate wearing the mask of time. Yet eternalism does not erase experience. You still feel surprise, fear, hope, and regret because consciousness moves through this static structure one moment at a time. Life remains intense, but its intensity becomes strange. You are not moving through time. Time is revealing itself to you piece by piece. Eternalism leaves you with the haunting sense that your entire life exists at once, and that you are only ever touching a thin slice of something infinitely larger: personal identity. Personal identity is the haunting question of what makes you you across time. Your body changes, your beliefs shift, your memories fade or distort, and yet you move through life with the deep intuition that you remain the same person. Something persists beneath growth and loss, beneath childhood innocence and adult regret. Personal identity asks where that continuity lives and whether it truly exists at all. At first, identity feels obvious. You recognize your name, your face, your history. But when examined closely, it begins to fracture. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago when your values were different and your fears unfamiliar? If your memories disappeared, would you still be you? If your personality changed completely, would identity survive, or would someone else quietly take your place? This question becomes emotionally charged because so much depends on it. Responsibility, promises, love, guilt, and hope all assume a stable self that endures through time. We punish people for past actions and praise them for long-term effort because we believe the same person persists. Personal identity is the thread that makes accountability possible and gives life a narrative rather than a series of disconnected moments. Yet that thread is fragile. Memory can be unreliable. Bodies replace their cells. Psychological traits evolve under pressure and experience. The self begins to look less like a solid core and more like a process, constantly rewriting itself while insisting on continuity. This realization can feel unsettling, as if the you protect and defend is always slightly slipping away. Personal identity lives in this tension between change and sameness. It is the story you keep telling yourself so that life feels coherent, even as the storyteller is slowly transformed by the telling itself. Ship of Theseus. The Ship of Theseus is a quiet but deeply unsettling paradox about identity, change, and what it really means for something to remain the same. Imagine a ship that has its wooden planks replaced one by one over time. Each replacement seems insignificant, almost unnoticeable. Yet eventually, every original piece is gone. The ship still looks the same, functions the same, and carries the same name. But is it still the same ship? This question cuts far deeper than it first appears. It mirrors the way human identity unfolds. Your body replaces its cells, your beliefs evolve, your memories fade or distort, and your personality shifts in response to experience. The person you were years ago no longer exists in any physical or psychological sense, yet you insist you are still you. The Ship of Theseus exposes how continuity can survive without permanence, and how familiarity can mask transformation. The paradox grows sharper when a second question emerges. If the discarded planks were gathered and reassembled into a ship identical to the original, which one would be the true Ship of Theseus? The one that maintained continuity through gradual change, or the one made of original parts? Identity begins to fracture. Essence, history, and material composition pull in different directions, each claiming legitimacy. This tension reveals how fragile identity really is. We rely on names, narratives, and memory to stabilize what is constantly in flux. The Ship of Theseus does not offer resolution, it offers exposure. It forces you to confront the possibility that identity is not a fixed core, but a story sustained through change. What remains the same may not be substance at all, but the pattern that endures while everything else quietly disappears. Mind-body problem. The mind-body problem is the disturbing question of how something invisible, private, and subjective can arise from something physical, measurable, and seemingly indifferent. Your body is matter, cells, neurons, electrical impulses, chemical reactions. Your mind is experience, thoughts, emotions, pain, joy, fear, and self-awareness. The problem emerges when you realize that no matter how deeply you examine the brain, you never find a thought inside it, only activity. Somewhere between firing neurons and lived experience, something mysterious happens. This gap is deeply unsettling. You can point to a wound in the body, but not to the pain itself. You can scan a brain during love, but love does not appear on the screen. The mind feels immediate and undeniable, yet it resists being reduced to physical explanation. This creates a fracture in how reality is understood. Are you a machine that somehow feels, or a conscious being trapped inside a machine? The mind-body problem shakes the foundation of identity. If the mind is nothing more than brain activity, then thoughts are events, not choices, and the self becomes a process rather than an agent. But if the mind is something separate, something non-physical, then how does it move the body at all? How does intention become action? Every answer seems to create a new mystery. This problem refuses to stay abstract because it touches every moment of lived experience. When you decide, suffer, imagine, or hope, you are experiencing something that feels real in a way matter does not. The mind-body problem exposes the tension between what science can explain and what consciousness insists on being. It leaves you suspended between certainty and wonder, aware that the most intimate part of your existence remains the least understood, unfolding inside a body that may never fully explain it. Chaos theory. Chaos theory is the unsettling realization that order and unpredictability are not opposites, but deeply intertwined. It reveals that systems governed by clear, deterministic rules can still behave in wildly unpredictable ways. Tiny variations, so small they seem meaningless, can explode into massive differences over time. A minor change at the beginning can reshape the entire outcome, turning certainty into illusion. This idea attacks the comfort of control. We like to believe that if we understand the rules, we can predict the future. Chaos theory exposes how fragile that belief is. Even when the system is fully lawful, perfect prediction becomes impossible because no measurement is ever exact. The world does not need randomness to surprise you. Precision itself, is enough to create instability. Emotionally, chaos theory mirrors human life. Small choices, brief encounters, moments you barely notice can redirect the entire trajectory of who you become. A conversation, a delay, a missed opportunity, things that feel insignificant in the moment may later reveal themselves as turning points. The idea that your life could hinge on microscopic details is both terrifying and strangely intimate. Chaos theory also reshapes how you see responsibility and planning. Effort still matters, but certainty does not exist. You act without knowing how far the ripples will travel. Control gives way to influence. You stop imagining life as a straight line and begin to see it as a sensitive web, trembling with possibility. There is no comfort in chaos theory, only awareness. It teaches that unpredictability is not a flaw in the universe, but a feature of its structure. Stability is temporary, order is delicate, and beneath the appearance of control lies a reality where the smallest disturbances can echo louder than intention ever could. Moral luck. Moral luck is the disturbing realization that how we judge people morally often depends on factors completely outside their control. Two individuals can make the same decision with the same intentions, yet be judged radically differently because chance intervenes. One outcome leads to tragedy, the other to nothing at all, and suddenly one person is condemned while the other walks away untouched. Moral luck exposes how tightly morality is tangled with accident. This idea cuts deep because it threatens the fairness we want morality to have. We like to believe that people deserve praise or blame strictly based on what they choose, not on what happens afterward. Moral luck shows how fragile that belief is. A reckless driver who arrives home safely is rarely judged like the one who, through sheer misfortune, hits a pedestrian. Intention remains the same, but consequence reshapes judgment. Emotionally, moral luck creates unease because it suggests that your moral identity is partly hostage to chance. You can act with care and still cause harm. You can act carelessly and be spared by luck alone. The difference between being labeled responsible or innocent may hinge on timing, circumstance, or randomness rather than character. This realization softens condemnation and complicates blame. Anger becomes less certain when you recognize how easily roles could have been reversed. Moral confidence begins to wobble as you see how often outcomes masquerade as intentions. Moral luck forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. Morality is not judged in a vacuum, but in a world where chance constantly interferes. It reveals how vulnerable moral judgment is to narrative. Once an outcome occurs, we reinterpret actions through its lens, convincing ourselves that what happened was somehow deserved. Moral luck pulls back that illusion, leaving you face to face with a world where goodness and guilt are never as clean as we want them to be. Simulacrum. A simulacrum is a copy that no longer points back to an original, a representation that exists on its own without a real source beneath it. At first, it seems harmless, an image, a symbol, a model meant to reflect reality. But over time, the reflection detaches. What was once a mirror becomes its own world, and the original quietly disappears. You are left interacting not with reality, but with layers of imitation that feel more real than what they replaced. This concept becomes disturbing when you realize how much of modern life operates this way. Images of happiness replace lived happiness. Performances of identity replace identity itself. Symbols, brands, profiles, and narratives begin to matter more than the people and experiences they were meant to represent. The copy stops imitating reality and starts defining it. What is visible becomes what is real, regardless of what actually exists underneath. A simulacrum does not deceive by lying. It deceives by overwhelming. When representations multiply endlessly, the question of truth loses relevance. You stop asking whether something is real and start asking whether it is convincing, popular, or shareable. Reality becomes secondary to appearance, and meaning is measured by recognition rather than substance. Living among simulacra creates a quiet alienation. You participate in systems that reward performance while eroding authenticity. You curate yourself, consume symbols, and navigate worlds built from representations of representations. The unsettling part is not that reality is gone, but that you no longer know how to return to it. When the copy feels more satisfying than the original ever was, the desire for what is real begins to fade, and the simulation becomes the place where meaning is manufactured, circulated, and consumed. Veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance is a thought experiment that forces you to confront justice by stripping you of everything that makes life feel unfairly personal. Imagine designing a society without knowing who you will be within it. You do not know your gender, wealth, intelligence, race, health, or social status. You could be born powerful or powerless, privileged or forgotten. Behind this veil, self-interest loses its usual clarity, and fear becomes the only honest guide. This uncertainty triggers something deeply human. When you cannot predict where you will land, cruelty becomes dangerous. Inequality becomes a gamble you might lose. Systems that favor only the strong suddenly feel reckless because you might wake up among the weak. The veil of ignorance exposes how often moral reasoning is secretly shaped by personal advantage rather than fairness. It removes the comforting illusion that justice can be designed from a position of safety. Emotionally, the veil presses on vulnerability. It forces you to feel the risk of being anyone. Suffering is no longer abstract. It could be yours. Under this condition, compassion stops being charity and becomes self-protection. You begin to value fairness not because it is noble, but because it is necessary when outcomes are unknown. The power of the veil of ignorance lies in how it reshapes moral imagination. It demands that you take responsibility for the structures you support, knowing you might be trapped inside them. It transforms justice from an external judgment into an act of radical empathy, where fairness is chosen not out of kindness, but out of the deep awareness that life's starting point is uncontrollable, and the system you create will eventually claim you as one of its own. Ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is the provocative claim that acting in your own self-interest is not just natural, but morally right. It rejects the idea that morality requires self-sacrifice or placing others above yourself. Instead, it argues that the primary obligation you have is to your own well-being, survival, and fulfillment. According to ethical egoism, caring for yourself is not selfish in a shameful sense. It is the foundation of all rational action. This idea is emotionally charged because it clashes with deeply ingrained moral instincts. From an early age, people are taught that goodness means putting others first, that self-interest is something to be restrained or apologized for. Ethical egoism turns that lesson upside down. It suggests that guilt over self-interest is misplaced and that denying your own needs can be more destructive than pursuing them honestly. Ethical egoism does not claim that harming others is good, but it refuses to treat others' interests as automatically superior to your own. Cooperation, kindness, and generosity are acceptable, shenja encouraged, but only when they align with your long-term benefit. Relationships, trust, and social harmony become strategies for flourishing, not moral duties imposed from outside. What makes ethical egoism unsettling is how clearly it exposes hidden motivations. Many actions praised as altruistic may still serve personal desires for approval, security, or meaning. Ethical egoism strips away moral pretense and forces you to confront a difficult question. If you remove praise, reward, and fear of judgment, what would you still choose to do? This philosophy does not promise moral comfort. It demands brutal honesty about desire, power, and survival. Ethical egoism leaves you alone with your interests, asking whether you are willing to own them openly instead of disguising them as virtue. Aesthetic objectivism. Aesthetic objectivism is the bold claim that beauty is not merely a matter of personal taste, but something real, discoverable, and independent of individual preference. It challenges the casual phrase, "Beauty is in the eye of the beholder," by suggesting that some things are genuinely beautiful whether or not anyone agrees. Harmony, balance, proportion, and form are not just pleasing reactions in the mind, but qualities that exist in the world itself. This idea carries emotional weight because it promises that beauty is not fragile or arbitrary. If beauty is objective, then art, music, and nature are not just sources of private enjoyment, but encounters with something meaningful beyond the self. A masterpiece does not rely on popularity to justify itself. It demands recognition, even from those who fail to appreciate it. Taste, in this view, can be refined or corrupted, trained or neglected. Aesthetic objectivism introduces hierarchy, and that is what makes it uncomfortable. If beauty is real, then judgments about art are not all equal. Some works truly are better than others, and disagreement may reflect limitation rather than difference. This confronts people with the unsettling possibility that their preferences say something about them, about attention, sensitivity, or depth of perception. At the same time, aesthetic objectivism resists cultural chaos. In a world where everything risks becoming equally valuable, it insists that standards matter. It protects art from being reduced to mere expression or trend. Beauty becomes something to aspire to, something that disciplines both the creator and the observer. Yet this belief also invites tension. Who decides the standards? How are they known? Aesthetic objectivism stands between reverence and rigidity, asserting that beauty is real while leaving open the uneasy question of how clearly humans can ever see it. Aesthetic subjectivism. Aesthetic subjectivism is the idea that beauty does not exist as a property of the world, but arises entirely within the observer. Nothing is beautiful on its own. A painting, a song, a face, a landscape holds no aesthetic value until someone experiences it and feels something in response. Beauty is not discovered, it is projected. It lives in perception, emotion, memory, and personal association rather than in the object itself. This philosophy quietly dismantles the authority of taste. If beauty is subjective, then no judgment is final and no standard is absolute. What moves one person may leave another completely untouched, and neither response is wrong. Your emotional history, your culture, your mood, and even the moment you encounter something all shape, whether it feels beautiful or empty. A song can feel transcendent one day and meaningless the next, without anything in the song changing at all. Aesthetic subjectivism reveals how deeply beauty is tied to identity. You do not just like things randomly. You respond to what resonates with who you are and who you have been. Beauty becomes a mirror rather than a property, reflecting inner states back to the observer. This makes aesthetic experience intensely personal and sometimes isolating, because what feels obvious to you may be invisible to others. There is freedom in this view, but also vulnerability. If beauty depends on perception, then it can fade, fracture, or fail to appear at all. Meaning in art and experience becomes fragile, contingent on attention and emotional openness. Aesthetic subjectivism does not promise shared standards or lasting beauty. It exposes beauty as something fleeting, intimate, and unstable, born in the moment of encounter and gone the moment the feeling dissolves. No self. No self is the unsettling idea that the self you feel so certain about does not exist as a fixed, independent entity. The sense of being a solid I at the center of experience is not a permanent core, but a mental construction, something assembled moment by moment from thoughts, memories, sensations, and habits. When you look closely, there is no stable observer behind the experience, only the experience itself unfolding. This realization can feel deeply destabilizing. The self feels intimate and obvious. It feels like the one thing you can be sure of. No self quietly dismantles that certainty. Thoughts appear on their own. Emotions rise and fall without permission. Desires shift. Moods change. When you search for the owner of these experiences, you find only more experiences. The you assume is in control never quite appears. Emotionally, this can provoke fear. If there is no fixed self, then what is being protected, improved, or defended? Identity begins to feel fragile, like a story continuously rewritten rather than a solid foundation. Regret, pride, and even blame lose some of their grip when there is no permanent entity to attach them to. Yet no self also offers a quiet release. If there is no fixed self, then suffering loses its anchor. Pain still arises, but it is not owned. Failure still happens, but it does not define an unchanging core. The pressure to constantly defend an identity softens. No self does not erase experience. It dissolves the illusion of ownership. What remains is awareness without a center, life happening without a narrator, and a strange freedom in realizing that you were never as solid or as trapped as you believed. Hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is the haunting question of why experience exists at all. It asks how physical processes, neurons firing, chemicals flowing, electrical signals moving through the brain, give rise to something as intimate and vivid as feeling, not behavior, not intelligence, not information processing, but subjective experience itself, the redness of red, the ache of sadness, the sensation of being here, inside a mind. This problem cuts deeper than science is comfortable admitting. We can explain how the brain reacts, decides, remembers, and acts. We can map neural activity with astonishing precision. Yet none of those explanations tell us why those processes are accompanied by experience. A machine could perform the same functions, but would it feel anything? And if not, why do you? Emotionally, the hard problem is unsettling because it isolates consciousness as something strangely alone in the universe. Your entire reality, every fear, hope, memory, and desire exists only because experience exists. Without it, the world would still function, but it would be empty of meaning. Consciousness is not an add-on. It is the stage on which everything appears. The problem also threatens reduction. If consciousness cannot be explained by physical facts alone, then reality may be incomplete as we understand it. Something fundamental may be missing from our picture of the world. That possibility cracks open a quiet terror, that the most important thing about you cannot be fully explained, measured, or captured. The hard problem does not ask how consciousness works. It asks why it is there at all. And in asking that, it exposes how mysterious your own existence truly is, how little separates you from a universe that could have been perfectly functional and utterly empty of experience. Moral realism. Moral realism is the conviction that right and wrong are not invented by human opinion, but exist as real features of the world. According to this view, moral facts are not dependent on culture, emotion, or personal belief. Some actions are truly right, and others truly wrong, even if no one recognizes them, even if entire societies deny them. Morality, in this sense, is discovered rather than created. This idea carries a powerful emotional charge because it gives moral judgment weight. If moral realism is true, then injustice is not merely a disagreement, but a genuine error. Cruelty is not just unpopular behavior, but a violation of something real. Moral outrage becomes more than a feeling. It becomes a response to truth being violated. This gives resistance meaning and sacrifice purpose, even when standing alone. Moral realism also anchors responsibility. It suggests that excuses rooted in culture or circumstance can only go so far. Believing something is acceptable does not make it right. Acting under social approval does not erase wrongdoing. There is something beyond consensus that actions are measured against, something that does not bend to convenience or power. Yet moral realism is demanding. It offers no easy refuge in subjectivity. If moral truths exist, then ignorance and self-deception matter. You may be wrong in ways that feel sincere. Your moral confidence may be misplaced. This possibility introduces humility and fear because certainty becomes risky when truth is objective. Moral realism refuses to let morality dissolve into preference or perspective. It insists that some moral claims aim at truth, not just agreement, and that the discomfort of being wrong is the price paid for believing that justice is more than a story we tell ourselves. Moral anti-realism. Moral anti-realism is the unsettling claim that moral truths do not exist independently of human minds. Right and wrong are not features of the universe waiting to be discovered. They are inventions, expressions, or agreements created by people. When you call something good or evil, you are not pointing to an objective fact in the world, but expressing an attitude, a feeling, or a socially reinforced judgment shaped by language, culture, and psychology. This view destabilizes moral certainty at its core. If moral facts are not real in the same way physical facts are real, then moral disagreement is not a clash between truth and error, but between perspectives. Condemnation loses its cosmic authority. Praise loses its absolute grounding. What feels like moral clarity begins to resemble collective storytelling, repeated so often that it takes on the weight of truth. Moral anti-realism forces you to confront how deeply morality depends on human needs and emotions. Rules emerge to manage fear, cooperation, power, and survival. Moral language becomes a tool for influence rather than a mirror of reality. When people say something is wrong, they may be expressing disgust, anger, or loyalty to a group rather than stating a universal fact. This realization can feel corrosive, as if the foundation beneath justice is dissolving. Yet moral anti-realism does not erase morality, it humanizes it. It exposes ethics as something fragile, negotiated, and sustained by shared belief rather than cosmic order. Responsibility shifts inward. Without objective moral facts to lean on, moral meaning must be maintained through commitment rather than certainty. What holds values together is not truth written into the universe, but the collective decision to care, to enforce, and to continue acting as if those values matter, even when the universe remains silent. Epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism is the deeply unsettling view that your conscious experiences, your thoughts, feelings, intentions, and inner voice do not actually cause anything. According to this idea, the physical processes of the brain do all the real work, while consciousness merely follows along, observing the outcome without influencing it. Your mind feels active, decisive, and in control, yet epiphenomenalism suggests it is more like a shadow cast by neural activity than a force with power of its own. This strikes at the heart of how agency is experienced. When you decide to act, it feels as though your intention causes movement. Epiphenomenalism quietly denies this. claiming the brain has already set the action in motion before awareness arrives. The feeling of choice becomes a byproduct rather than a driver. Consciousness narrates what happens, but never truly intervenes. The emotional weight of this idea is heavy. If thoughts do not cause actions, then responsibility feels fragile. Pride in achievement, guilt over wrongdoing, and even the sense of effort begin to feel illusory. You start to wonder whether your inner life matters at all, or whether it is simply along for the ride, watching a body act out decisions made elsewhere. Yet, epiphenomenalism also exposes something profound. Even if consciousness lacks causal power, it remains the only place where life is actually felt. Pain still hurts, joy still glows, meaning still unfolds within experience, regardless of whether it changes outcomes. Epiphenomenalism forces you to confront a disturbing separation between feeling and doing, revealing a world where the most vivid part of existence may not steer the course of events, yet remains the only place where existence is truly lived. Fatalism. Fatalism is the belief that outcomes are fixed and unavoidable, no matter what choices you believe you are making. It suggests that certain events will happen regardless of effort, intention, or resistance. The future is already written, and human action does not alter the final result. What feels like control is merely participation in an ending that cannot be changed. This idea carries a heavy emotional weight because it challenges the value of striving. If the outcome is guaranteed, then struggle begins to feel pointless. Hope weakens, responsibility fades. Fatalism whispers that your actions are shadows, moving along a path laid out long before you ever became aware of it. Even rebellion against fate becomes part of the fate itself. Fatalism often emerges in moments of exhaustion or despair. When effort repeatedly fails, the idea that nothing could have been different can feel like relief. Blame dissolves, regret softens. If events were inevitable, then personal failure loses its sting. Suffering becomes something endured rather than questioned. Yet fatalism also breeds passivity. When belief in agency collapses, motivation follows. Why fight for change if the result is fixed? Why risk pain if the ending cannot be altered? This mindset can quietly drain life of urgency, turning existence into a waiting room rather than a field of action. Fatalism does not deny movement or action. People still choose, plan, and act. But under fatalism, these actions lose causal power. They become part of the script rather than forces that shape it. The unsettling core of fatalism is not that things happen, but that nothing you do truly matters to how they end. Occam's razor. Occam's razor is the quiet discipline of restraint in a world addicted to complexity. It is the principle that when multiple explanations are possible, the simplest one that adequately accounts for the facts should be preferred, not because it is comforting, but because unnecessary assumptions blur understanding. Occam's razor does not promise truth, it promises clarity by cutting away what does not need to be there. Emotionally, this principle challenges a deep human impulse. People are drawn to elaborate stories, hidden forces, and dramatic explanations that make events feel significant. Occam's razor stands against that instinct. It asks you to resist the thrill of mystery for its own sake, and to tolerate answers that feel almost disappointingly plain. Often, what unsettles us most is not that reality is complex, but that it is not as complex as we hoped. Occam's razor exposes how easily the mind overreaches. Faced with uncertainty, we pile on assumptions to regain control. We imagine intentions where there are patterns, designs where there are coincidences. The razor cuts through these comforts, forcing you to confront how little you may actually need to explain what is happening. This can feel like loss, as if meaning itself has been reduced. Yet there is power in this simplicity. By stripping explanations down to their essentials, Occam's razor protects thinking from illusion and self-deception. It disciplines curiosity, teaching it to ask whether a belief adds understanding or merely decoration. It encourages intellectual humility, reminding you that complexity should be earned, not assumed. Occam's razor does not deny depth, mystery, or nuance. It demands that they justify themselves. In doing so, it reshapes how you think, pushing you to favor precision over excess and understanding over imagination when imagination outpaces evidence. Principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason is the deeply unsettling idea that nothing happens without a reason, that for every fact, event, or truth, there must be an explanation for why it is so and not otherwise. It insists that reality is not arbitrary, chaotic, or groundless, but structured by an underlying logic that makes every occurrence intelligible in principle, even if that explanation remains forever out of reach. At first, this principle feels reassuring. It promises that the world is not random, that nothing simply appears out of nowhere, and that confusion is temporary rather than fundamental. If everything has a reason, then mystery is a problem to be solved, not a wall to be accepted. The universe becomes something that can, at least in theory, be understood rather than merely endured. But this demand for explanation quickly becomes disturbing. If everything must have a reason, then so must the reasons themselves. Explanations multiply, each requiring another explanation, threatening an infinite regress with no final stopping point. The mind begins to strain under the weight of its own questioning. Why does the universe exist at all? Why these laws rather than others? Why something instead of nothing? The principle refuses to let these questions rest. Applied to human life, the principle of sufficient reason can feel suffocating. If every thought, choice, and action has a cause, then spontaneity begins to look like ignorance of hidden forces rather than freedom. Even accidents become necessary outcomes of unseen chains. The idea that nothing is without reason can drain the comfort from chance and the mystery from existence. Yet the principle continues to haunt philosophy because abandoning it feels even worse. To accept that some things simply happen for no reason at all threatens meaning itself. The principle of sufficient reason sits at the edge between order and abyss, daring you to decide which uncertainty you can live with. Logical positivism. Logical positivism is the sharp, unforgiving philosophy that draws a hard line between what can be meaningfully said and what must be dismissed as empty noise. It insists that a statement only has meaning if it can be empirically verified or logically proven. Anything that cannot be tested, observed, or formally analyzed, metaphysics, theology, moral absolutes, and much of traditional philosophy, is treated not as false, but as meaningless. This approach feels brutally clarifying at first. It promises intellectual cleanliness, a world purified of vague claims and emotional illusions. Logical positivism attacks the comfort of grand narratives and forces language to earn its right to exist. If a claim cannot be checked against experience or logic, it is stripped of authority. Certainty no longer comes from tradition or intuition, but from verification. Yet this clarity comes at a cost. Human experience overflows the boundaries of measurement. Love, beauty, purpose, and suffering resist reduction to testable propositions. Logical positivism casts a cold light on these experiences, revealing how much of what matters most cannot be proven, only lived. In doing so, it risks draining life of depth in the pursuit of precision. Emotionally, logical positivism creates tension between meaning and meaninglessness. By rejecting what cannot be verified, it forces you to question whether unprovable experiences still matter. Are values illusions simply because they cannot be measured? Or does the demand for verification misunderstand the nature of human existence? Logical positivism exposes the power and the limits of reason. It sharpens thinking, but narrows the world. It leaves you standing between clarity and emptiness, aware that while not everything meaningful can be proven, demanding proof forever changes how seriously words, claims, and beliefs are taken. Existential angst. Existential angst is the deep, unsettling anxiety that arises when you become fully aware of your own freedom, responsibility, and mortality. It is not fear of a specific threat, but a diffuse dread that seeps in when the familiar structures of life stop feeling solid. You realize that no one else is in control, that there is no hidden guide ensuring things will turn out right, and that your life is ultimately yours to define or waste. This feeling often appears in moments of stillness. When distractions fade, the weight of existence presses forward. Every choice suddenly feels heavy because it excludes countless other possibilities. Every decision becomes a declaration of who you are, and there is no external authority to approve or correct it. Existential angst is the mind confronting the vast openness of its own future. What makes this anxiety so intense is its intimacy. You cannot escape it by running or reasoning it away. It comes from within, from the realization that your identity is not fixed, but constantly being shaped by your actions. You are responsible not just for what you do, but for what you become. There is no safety net beneath that responsibility. Existential angst is often misunderstood as weakness, but it is a sign of awareness. It emerges when illusions fall away and life is seen without guarantees. The discomfort does not point to danger, but to possibility. In recognizing that nothing predetermines your path, existential angst exposes both the terror and the raw freedom of being alive, where every moment carries the silent question of what you will choose to make of it. Bad faith. Bad faith is the quiet lie you tell yourself to escape the weight of freedom. It is not simple dishonesty, but a deeper form of self-deception where you deny your own responsibility by pretending you have no choice. You hide behind roles, labels, expectations, or circumstances, convincing yourself that you are merely acting as required rather than choosing as a free individual. This deception is seductive because freedom is terrifying. To admit that you are free is to admit that you are accountable for your life, your values, and your failures. Bad faith offers relief. You tell yourself that you behave a certain way because that's just how things are, or that's who I am, or I had no other option. These excuses soften guilt and dull anxiety, allowing you to avoid confronting the discomfort of possibility. Emotionally, bad faith creates a split within the self. On some level, you know you are avoiding something, that you are shrinking away from a truth about yourself, yet you continue the performance, playing a role rather than living authentically. Over time, this erodes integrity. Life begins to feel hollow, as if you are watching yourself from a distance, trapped in routines that no longer feel chosen. Bad faith is especially powerful in social settings. People adopt identities handed to them by culture, work, or relationships and mistake those identities for destiny. Responsibility dissolves into obligation. Choice disappears behind habit. What makes bad faith so unsettling is that it is voluntary and invisible. No one forces you into it. You cooperate in your own self-deception because facing freedom would demand change. Bad faith thrives in that refusal, allowing you to live as if you are determined while secretly knowing you are not. Naturalism. Naturalism is the worldview that insists reality is entirely self-contained, governed by natural laws without appeal to anything beyond them. There are no hidden realms, no supernatural forces intervening behind the scenes, no transcendent purposes guiding events from outside the universe. Everything that exists, from galaxies to thoughts, belongs to the same continuous system, unfolding according to patterns that do not care about meaning, intention, or hope. This perspective can feel brutally honest. Naturalism strips away comforting explanations that place human life at the center of a cosmic plan. Suffering is not a test. Success is not a blessing. Tragedy is not balanced by unseen justice. Events happen because conditions allow them to happen, not because they are deserved. The universe does not reward, punish, or explain itself. At the same time, naturalism collapses the distance between humans and the rest of existence. You are not an exception to the rules of reality. You are an expression of them. Your thoughts arise from the same processes that form storms and stars. Consciousness becomes something that happens within nature, not something injected into it. This can feel diminishing, but it can also feel grounding. There is no need to search beyond the world to understand yourself because you are already fully inside it. Naturalism forces meaning to become a human responsibility rather than a cosmic guarantee. If there is no higher order assigning value, then value must be created, maintained, and defended by those who care. Relationships, creativity, and understanding matter not because they are eternally ordained, but because they are fragile and finite. Naturalism does not offer consolation beyond reality. It offers reality itself, unfiltered, demanding that significance be forged in the only place it can exist, within the natural world. Moral nihilism. Moral nihilism is the stark and unsettling belief that morality does not truly exist. Right and wrong are not hidden truths waiting to be discovered, nor are they grounded in nature, reason, or the universe itself. They are human inventions, stories told to regulate behavior, ease fear, and impose order on a reality that offers none. According to moral nihilism, no action is objectively good or evil. There are only events, reactions, and consequences stripped of inherent moral meaning. This idea can feel deeply destabilizing. From childhood, morality is presented as something solid and unquestionable. Rules are framed as facts. Values are treated as truths. Moral nihilism pulls that foundation out from under you, revealing that outrage, guilt, pride, and moral certainty may rest on nothing more than shared agreement. The emotional weight of judgment begins to evaporate, replaced by an uncomfortable silence where certainty once lived. Without objective morality, condemnation loses its cosmic authority. Cruelty is no longer wrong in an absolute sense, and kindness is no longer right beyond preference or consequence. This realization can provoke fear, as if removing moral truth invites chaos. If nothing is truly wrong, what stops anything from happening? Yet moral nihilism does not deny suffering or consequence. Pain still hurts. Harm still damages. What it denies is moral meaning baked into reality itself. Responsibility becomes practical rather than moral, based on outcomes rather than cosmic judgment. Moral nihilism forces you to confront a world where values are chosen, not discovered, and where meaning is imposed, not revealed. Living with this view means accepting that morality has no external anchor. Whatever values guide you do so because you commit to them, not because the universe demands it. In that void, every moral stance becomes an act of creation rather than obedience, carrying the heavy truth that nothing compels you to care, except that you do. Hume's guillotine. Hume's guillotine is the sharp philosophical divide between what is and what ought to be. It exposes a quiet but devastating error humans make constantly, assuming that facts about the world automatically tell us how we should act within it. Just because something exists, happens often, or feels natural, does not mean it is morally justified. The blade falls the moment you try to cross that gap without noticing. This idea cuts deep because it dismantles moral certainty. People instinctively move from description to judgment. Violence exists, therefore it must be natural. Competition is common, therefore it must be right. Survival favors the strong, therefore the weak deserve their fate. Hume's guillotine stops this reasoning cold. No amount of facts can produce a moral command on their own. Values do not grow out of data unless something is quietly smuggled in. Emotionally, this realization is destabilizing. It means morality is not hidden inside reality, waiting to be discovered. The universe does not whisper instructions. Nature does not care what you do. If you claim something should be done, you are revealing a value you brought with you, not one the world provided. Responsibility snaps back onto the human mind. Hume's guillotine forces uncomfortable honesty. When you argue morally, you are no longer just describing reality. You are declaring what you care about. There is no escape into objectivity. Every ought exposes a commitment, a preference, a stance you must own. This idea does not destroy morality, it strips it of camouflage. It reveals that ethics begins where facts end, and that every moral claim is a choice to stand for something without the universe standing behind you. Is-ought problem. The is-ought problem is the unsettling gap between describing the world and deciding how it should be. It begins with a simple observation. No matter how many facts you collect about reality, those facts alone do not tell you what you ought to do. You can describe what people are like, how they behave, what they desire, or what consequences follow from certain actions, but none of that automatically creates a moral obligation. Somewhere between this is and this should be, a jump occurs. This gap is emotionally disturbing because people instinctively want morality to feel grounded. If suffering exists, surely we should reduce it. If something is natural, surely it must be acceptable. The is-ought problem exposes how often moral certainty smuggles values into facts without noticing. We slide from description into prescription, convincing ourselves that reality itself is giving us moral instructions. Once this gap is revealed, moral arguments become fragile. You can no longer rely on nature, tradition, or statistics alone to justify what ought to be done. Violence being common does not make it right. Survival being instinctive does not make it good. The world stops offering moral guidance on its own, leaving humans to supply it. This realization is unsettling because it removes moral safety nets. Values are no longer guaranteed by how things are. They must be chosen, defended, and explained. The burden shifts from discovery to responsibility. You are forced to admit that moral principles do not emerge automatically from facts, but from commitments layered onto them. The is-ought problem does not destroy morality, but it strips it of illusion. It reveals that moral reasoning always involves a leap, a decision to care about certain outcomes over others. Once you see that leap, you can never unsee it, and every moral claim begins to echo with the question of where its ought truly comes from. Collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is the idea that groups of people share a layer of awareness that rises above individual minds, shaping how reality is perceived, interpreted, and lived. It is not a mystical hive mind, but a powerful psychological and social force formed by shared beliefs, values, symbols, and assumptions that quietly guide behavior. Long before you choose what to think, the collective consciousness of your society has already outlined what feels normal, possible, or unthinkable. This shared awareness operates invisibly. It tells you which lives matter, which fears are legitimate, which ambitions are respectable, and which questions are dangerous. You absorb it through language, rituals, media, education, and unspoken rules. Because it is shared, it feels natural. Because it feels natural, it rarely feels imposed. Collective consciousness becomes the background noise of existence, shaping perception without announcing itself. The unsettling power of collective consciousness lies in how easily it overrides individuality. People who deviate from shared beliefs often experience not just disagreement, but social rejection. The group rewards alignment and punishes deviation, reinforcing itself through approval, shame, and silence. Entire populations can come to accept ideas they would reject in isolation, simply because the shared mindset makes them feel inevitable. At the same time, collective consciousness is what allows societies to function at all. Trust, cooperation, moral norms, and shared meaning depend on it. Without a common framework, communication collapses and social life fragments. This creates a dangerous tension. The same force that binds people together can also trap them inside unquestioned assumptions. Collective consciousness is neither purely oppressive nor purely liberating. It is the invisible structure of shared reality, shaping what people see, believe, and feel together. To become aware of it is to realize that much of what feels like personal conviction is actually collective inheritance, passed down, reinforced, and rarely examined. Emergence. Emergence is the unsettling idea that complex realities can arise from simple parts without being fully reducible to them. It suggests that when individual components interact in certain ways, entirely new properties appear, properties that cannot be found in the parts themselves. Consciousness emerging from neurons, life emerging from chemistry, meaning emerging from symbols. Something new arrives that was not present, predictable, or visible at the lower level. This challenges the instinct to believe that understanding the pieces means understanding the whole. You can study neurons endlessly, yet the feeling of being alive never appears in isolation. You can analyze individual words, yet meaning only exists when they interact. Emergence reveals that reality is layered, and that explanation does not always flow cleanly upward from fundamentals. Emotionally, emergence destabilizes certainty. It suggests that control is partial and prediction fragile. Systems behave in ways no single part intends. Outcomes appear that no component planned. You begin to see how easily order and chaos coexist, how fragile structures can produce profound complexity, and how something as intimate as identity can arise from interactions rather than essence. There's also something quietly humbling about emergence. It dissolves the fantasy of total reduction. Not everything important can be traced back to a single cause. Some truths only exist at higher levels, visible only when parts combine and patterns form. Emergence invites awe into understanding. It reminds you that even in a universe governed by laws, novelty is real. Through emergence, meaning no longer needs a grand design. It can arise naturally, unexpectedly, and without intention. Life does not need to be planned to be profound. It only needs the right conditions for something new to appear, and once it does, it becomes real in its own right, irreducible and impossible to ignore. Teleological suspension. Teleological suspension is the disturbing idea that moral rules can be temporarily overridden in service of a higher purpose. It suggests that in rare and extreme situations, ethical norms are not absolute, and that an individual may be justified in violating them to fulfill what they believe to be a greater meaning or calling. This concept forces morality into conflict with itself, placing duty against purpose, obedience against faith, and law against inner conviction. What makes teleological suspension emotionally intense is the isolation it creates. The individual who acts under it cannot fully explain or justify their choice to others. From the outside, the action appears immoral, even monstrous. The burden of decision is carried alone, without social approval or moral reassurance. The person must accept being judged as wrong while believing they are acting in service of something higher. This idea exposes the terrifying power of belief. When someone becomes convinced that their purpose transcends ordinary ethics, moral boundaries begin to dissolve. Compassion, rules, and shared values can be suspended in favor of an unseen goal. History is filled with examples of this logic producing both profound sacrifice and unspeakable harm. The same structure that justifies devotion can also legitimize cruelty. Teleological suspension forces a painful question. Is morality universal, or can it be overridden by meaning? If ethical rules bend before purpose, then the danger is not only in breaking them, but in believing too deeply that one's purpose is pure. This concept leaves you staring at the thin line between faith and fanaticism, where conviction becomes strong enough to silence doubt and excuse the unforgivable. Meaninglessness. Meaninglessness is the quiet realization that the universe does not provide a built-in reason for your existence. It is the moment when the comforting belief that life is moving toward some ultimate purpose begins to dissolve. No cosmic plan, no final justification, no hidden explanation waiting to be uncovered. Things happen, time passes, people live and die, and the universe does not pause to explain why any of it matters. This realization can feel like the floor giving way beneath you. Much of human effort is fueled by the assumption that meaning exists somewhere beyond the struggle, that suffering leads to significance, that endurance is rewarded by purpose. Meaninglessness interrupts that story. It suggests that events do not happen for a reason, they simply happen. Pain is not a lesson. Success is not proof. Loss is not part of a larger design. Emotionally, meaninglessness provokes fear and vertigo. Without an external purpose, achievements feel fragile and goals feel arbitrary. The question, "Why am I doing this?" echoes louder, unanswered. Motivation begins to waver when nothing guarantees that your efforts point towards something permanent or higher. Yet meaninglessness is not just despair, it is exposure. It strips away borrowed meanings inherited from tradition, authority, or expectation. It forces you to see life without narrative cushioning. What remains is raw existence, moments, sensations, relationships, choices, standing alone without cosmic endorsement. This can feel unbearable, but it is also clarifying. Without assigned meaning, nothing is demanded of you by the universe itself. There is no obligation to fulfill a role you did not choose. Meaninglessness confronts you with the unsettling truth that if meaning exists at all, it will not arrive from outside. It will have to be lived, created, or endured in full awareness that nothing guarantees it was ever necessary. Infinite regress. Infinite regress is the disturbing realization that some questions, once asked, refuse to ever reach an end. It occurs when an explanation depends on another explanation, which depends on another and another, stretching backward endlessly without a final foundation. Each answer seems reasonable on its own, yet together they create a chain that never resolves. The mind keeps asking why, and reality never gives permission to stop. This idea becomes unsettling because human understanding depends on resting points. We want causes, origins, and first principles, something solid to stand on. Infinite regress removes that ground. If every reason requires another reason, then nothing is ultimately explained. The sense of certainty begins to dissolve, replaced by a feeling that knowledge is suspended in midair, supported only by more unanswered questions. Infinite regress appears everywhere once you start looking. What caused this event? Another event. What justifies this belief? Another belief. What makes that rule valid? Another rule. The pattern repeats until the mind either forces an arbitrary stopping point or retreats in exhaustion. The regress does not end because it cannot, only because the human need for closure demands silence. This creates a quiet tension between reason and comfort. Accepting infinite regress means accepting that some aspects of reality may have no ultimate explanation, no final answer waiting at the bottom. Rejecting it means introducing assumptions that cannot themselves be justified without repeating the same problem. Either way, something breaks. Infinite regress exposes the limits of rational inquiry. It reveals that the desire for absolute grounding may be incompatible with how reality is structured. The discomfort it produces is not a flaw in thinking, but a signal that some questions are deeper than the tools we use to ask them. The regress continues not because we are careless, but because the world may not owe us a final why. Moral responsibility. Moral responsibility is the heavy idea that you can be held accountable for what you do, not just for the outcomes of your actions, but for the fact that they came from you. It rests on the belief that your choices reflect something about who you are, and that you could have acted differently. Without this assumption, praise feels hollow, blame feels unfair, and justice begins to lose its meaning. This concept presses directly against the fear that control is an illusion. Biology, upbringing, trauma, and circumstance all shape behavior long before conscious choice enters the picture. Moral responsibility exists in the tension between influence and agency. It asks whether being shaped excuses you, or whether acting through those influences still makes the action yours. The answer is never emotionally neutral because it determines how we judge others and ourselves. The weight of moral responsibility is felt most sharply in moments of regret. Guilt only hurts because you believe the action belonged to you. Pride only feels earned because you believe effort mattered. Moral responsibility gives emotional depth to life by tying inner intention to external consequence. It transforms behavior into character and mistakes into self-reckoning. Yet this responsibility can feel crushing. To be responsible is to carry the burden of consequences that cannot be undone. It means living with the knowledge that some harm was avoidable and that some good was never chosen. Moral responsibility does not allow easy escape into excuses or inevitability. At the same time, it is the foundation of dignity. To deny responsibility entirely is to reduce humans to mechanisms rather than agents. Moral responsibility insists that, even within constraints, actions still express who you are. It anchors accountability, justice, and self-respect in the fragile belief that your choices matter, and that they deserve to be taken seriously. Moral responsibility. Moral responsibility is the heavy idea that you can be held accountable for what you do, not just for the outcomes of your actions, but for the fact that they came from you. It rests on the belief that your choices reflect something about who you are, and that you could have acted differently. Without this assumption, praise feels hollow, blame feels unfair, and justice begins to lose its meaning. This concept presses directly against the fear that control is an illusion. Biology, upbringing, trauma, and circumstance all shape behavior long before conscious choice enters the picture. Moral responsibility exists in the tension between influence and agency. It asks whether being shaped excuses you or whether acting through those influences still makes the action yours. The answer is never emotionally neutral because it determines how we judge others and ourselves. The weight of moral responsibility is felt most sharply in moments of regret. Guilt only hurts because you believe the action belonged to you. Pride only feels earned because you believe effort mattered. Moral responsibility gives emotional depth to life by tying inner intention to external consequence. It transforms behavior into character and mistakes into self-reckoning. Yet this responsibility can feel crushing. To be responsible is to carry the burden of consequences that cannot be undone. It means living with the knowledge that some harm was avoidable and that some good was never chosen. Moral responsibility does not allow easy escape into excuses or inevitability. At the same time, it is the foundation of dignity. To deny responsibility entirely is to reduce humans to mechanisms rather than agents. Moral responsibility insists that even within constraints, actions still express who you are. It anchors accountability, justice, and self-respect in the fragile belief that your choices matter and that they deserve to be taken seriously. Authenticity. Authenticity is the demand to live in alignment with who you truly are, rather than who you are expected to be. It is the refusal to let social pressure, fear, or convenience dictate your identity. To live authentically is to recognize the gap between the life you perform for others and the life that feels honest from within, and to feel the tension of knowing that closing that gap will cost you something. This idea becomes emotionally charged the moment you realize how much of yourself has been shaped by external approval. From early on, you learn which traits are rewarded and which are discouraged. Over time, those expectations harden into habits, and habits harden into identity. Authenticity disrupts this process. It asks whether the person you have become is a choice or a survival strategy. Living authentically requires confrontation. You must face the parts of yourself you have ignored, hidden, or diluted to belong. This can mean disappointing others, losing status, or stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. Authenticity is not comfort, it is exposure. It removes the shield of conformity and leaves you responsible for the shape of your own life. There is also a quiet danger in authenticity. Self-honesty can reveal desires and truths that are inconvenient, socially unacceptable, or frightening. You cannot selectively be authentic. Once the process begins, it demands consistency. You must own not only your values, but your flaws, your contradictions, and your limits. Authenticity does not promise happiness or approval. It offers something riskier: coherence. A life where actions and identity align, where you no longer betray yourself to maintain an image, and where meaning comes from integrity rather than acceptance. Social construct. A social construct is something that feels solid, natural, and unquestionable, yet exists only because people collectively agree that it does. Money, status, gender roles, laws, and even certain moral norms carry immense power over human behavior, not because they are written into nature, but because enough people treat them as real. Once that agreement takes hold, the construct becomes invisible, shaping lives while pretending it was always there. This idea is unsettling because it exposes how much of reality is negotiated rather than discovered. Things that feel fixed and inevitable begin to look fragile. A border exists because people recognize it. A title matters because others respect it. A rule holds power because everyone acts as if breaking it would have consequences. Social constructs govern behavior not through force alone, but through belief, habit, and shared expectation. Emotionally, realizing something is a social construct can feel like waking up inside a system you never consciously chose. You begin to see how identity, success, and normality are shaped by stories passed down and reinforced over time. Pressure intensifies when deviation carries punishment, even if the rule itself has no natural foundation. The fear of exclusion becomes the glue that keeps the construct alive. At the same time, social constructs reveal their instability. What is enforced in one era dissolves in another. What feels obvious to one culture appears absurd to another. This variability exposes how deeply human cooperation depends on imagination and trust. A social construct is powerful precisely because it is not physically real. It lives in collective belief, and once that belief is shaken, its authority weakens. Seeing this does not free you instantly, but it changes how you move through the world, aware that many invisible walls exist only because people continue to agree not to walk through them. Philosophical zombie. A philosophical zombie is a thought experiment that looks human in every possible way, yet lacks any inner experience. It speaks, reacts, feels pain, laughs, and forms relationships exactly as a normal person would, but inside there is nothing. No awareness, no sensations, no subjective feeling of being alive. From the outside, it is indistinguishable from you. From the inside, there is no one home. This idea is disturbing because it attacks the certainty of consciousness. If a being can behave exactly like a conscious person without actually experiencing anything, then behavior alone cannot explain awareness. Everything science can observe, brain activity, speech, reactions, could be present, and yet experience itself might still be missing. Consciousness begins to look like something extra, something not captured by physical description. The zombie forces an uncomfortable question. How do you know anyone else is conscious? You assume other people feel as you do, but you never experience their inner world directly. You infer it from behavior just as you would with a zombie. This makes consciousness feel fragile, isolated, and profoundly private. You could be surrounded by perfect imitations and never know. The thought experiment also turns inward. How do you know you are not a philosophical zombie? You experience consciousness, but can you explain why? What makes awareness arise here rather than nowhere at all? The zombie exposes a gap between physical processes and subjective experience that refuses to close. Philosophical zombies are not meant to exist, but to haunt explanation. They linger at the edge of understanding, reminding you that consciousness is not just a function to be measured, but a mystery you are trapped inside. They force you to confront the unsettling possibility that awareness may not be guaranteed by complexity, and that being alive does not automatically explain what it feels like to be. Theory of forms. The theory of forms is the idea that the world you see is not the world as it truly is. Everything you encounter through your senses is only an imperfect copy of a deeper, invisible reality. Objects decay, people change, and experiences fade, yet the concepts behind them, beauty, justice, equality, goodness, remain untouched. According to this view, these perfect forms exist beyond space and time, and what you experience in daily life is merely their shadow. This idea strikes at the instability of the physical world. Nothing you touch lasts. Nothing you rely on stays the same. The theory of forms offers an explanation for this instability by claiming that true reality is not found in matter, but in abstract perfection. A beautiful object can lose its beauty, but beauty itself does not age. A just act can fail, but justice itself remains pure and unchanged. Emotionally, this creates a sense of longing. If the physical world is a copy, then fulfillment is always just out of reach. You sense something perfect behind imperfect experiences, something your mind recognizes even when your hands cannot grasp it. The theory of forms suggests that this longing is not accidental, but a memory of something deeper than the physical world allows. At the same time, the theory reshapes knowledge itself. Learning becomes an act of remembering rather than discovering. Truth is not constructed from experience, but recalled through reason. This elevates thought over sensation and insight over appearance. The theory of forms invites you to distrust the surface of reality and search for what does not change beneath it, hinting that the most real things in existence are not those you can see, but those you can only think. Existence precedes essence. Existence precedes essence is the radical claim that you are not born with a predefined nature or purpose waiting to be fulfilled. You arrive first, undefined and unfinished, and only later become something through your actions. There is no hidden blueprint dictating who you must be. What you are is not discovered by looking inward, but created by how you live. This idea cuts deeply into the comfort of identity. Many people rely on labels, roles, and expectations to explain themselves. Existence precedes, essence removes that shelter. If there is no given essence, then no excuse carries ultimate weight. You cannot say, "This is just how I am," without admitting that you have chosen to remain that way. Every habit you reinforce, every value you uphold, and every compromise you accept contributes to the person you are becoming. Emotionally, this freedom is heavy. Without essence, failure cannot be blamed on fate, and success cannot be credited to destiny. Responsibility expands to fill the space where meaning once lived. Even inaction becomes defining, because not choosing is still a way of choosing. You are constantly shaping yourself, whether you are aware of it or not. Yet within this burden lies a fierce empowerment. If essence comes after existence, then no past defines you completely. You are not trapped by origin, history, or expectation. Change is not betrayal of your true self, because there is no fixed self to betray. You are always in the process of becoming. Existence precedes essence, demands honesty and courage, forcing you to confront the truth that your life is not something you uncover, but something you continuously write through the choices you make. Radical doubt. Radical doubt is the deliberate act of questioning everything you believe to be true, including the beliefs that feel most obvious and untouchable. It is not casual skepticism, but a systematic suspension of trust in perception, memory, logic, and authority. Nothing is spared. The goal is not to destroy knowledge, but to see what remains when every assumption is stripped away. This process is emotionally destabilizing because it removes the mental furniture that makes reality feel safe. The world you navigate daily depends on trust. Trust in your senses, in language, in shared meanings. Radical doubt pulls that trust apart. The familiar becomes fragile. Certainty dissolves. Even your own thoughts begin to feel suspect, as if the ground beneath awareness is shifting. Radical doubt isolates the mind. When everything external is questioned, consciousness turns inward, searching for something that cannot be denied. The silence that follows is intense. Without beliefs to lean on, the mind confronts its own vulnerability and limits. The comfort of inherited truth is replaced by exposure. Yet this doubt is not paralysis, it is purification. By refusing to accept ideas simply because they are familiar, radical doubt creates the possibility of rebuilding knowledge on firmer ground. What survives doubt gains a different kind of weight. It is no longer borrowed or assumed, it is earned through resistance. Radical doubt demands courage because it risks leaving you with less than you started with. It offers no guarantee that clarity will follow. What it does offer is honesty, a confrontation with how much of what you know rests on trust rather than certainty, and how fragile the foundations of belief truly are once you dare to question them without restraint. Language games. Language games are the invisible rules that govern how words gain meaning through use rather than definition. Meaning is not fixed inside words like an object in a box. It emerges from how words are used within specific forms of life. The same word can function differently depending on context, intention, and situation, and outside of those contexts, it can lose its sense entirely. Language does not simply describe reality, it operates within it. This idea unsettles the assumption that misunderstanding is always a failure of intelligence. Often people talk past each other not because one is wrong, but because they are playing different language games. Moral debates, political arguments, and personal conflicts frequently collapse into frustration because the same words are being used according to different rules. Agreement becomes impossible when the game itself is not shared. Emotionally, language games reveal how fragile communication really is. You may feel understood, only to realize later that others interpreted your words through a different framework. Certainty dissolves when you recognize that clarity depends less on precision and more on shared practice. Meaning becomes something negotiated moment by moment rather than discovered once and for all. Language games also expose how power operates. Whoever controls the dominant language game controls what counts as sense, truth, or legitimacy. What sounds rational in one context can sound absurd in another, not because reality changed, but because the rules of the game did. This makes language a quiet force, shaping belief without announcing itself. Once you become aware of language games, words lose their innocence. You start listening not just to what is said, but to how it is being used and why. Meaning stops feeling absolute and begins to feel situational, embedded in human activity. Language games reveal that understanding others requires more than vocabulary. It requires entering the game they are already playing.